evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after almost blowing a 39-point lead last week, the D's blew a 24-point lead this week, ultimately succumbing to the Brisbane Lions in heartbreaking circumstances by 5 points as the 2024 season slips further and further away. Joining me tonight to dissect another devastating loss is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Bin Man. Good evening to all our faithful listeners. I'd like to welcome everybody here to Demonland, where the supporters are despondent after a win and joyful after a loss.
That's actually a very good summary of Demonland, because they were in meltdown last week. I think they were a little bit, well, I wouldn't say happy is the word, but they were pleased with what they saw. Also joining us tonight to perhaps gloat that we didn't lose by 10 goals, as many, and yours truly included, predicted, is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's a funny old world out there in football fandom. And last week, it sounded, it was like a funeral after winning. And this week, people are happy with a loss. So I'll take the 4 points from last week. I went back and I hadn't watched the replay of that game last week, and I watched it again. The Roos, that was actually a pretty high-standard game right from the get-go. I know we're talking about the Lions, and the Roos were really impressive against the Dogs as well. It was a much better performance than many gave us credit. And it was a terrific performance this week, but it was it was a fantastic performance, but really disappointing to lose. And it's amazing how sort of perception shapes expectations, isn't it? Because I wasn't surprised at all that we struggled in the last quarter last week, because coming off a bye, that's historically what we've done. So it was no surprise. So I wasn't disappointed in that performance. And I expected us to bounce back, as I talked about last week, this week. And I was really bullish about our chances. I hope some of those eagle-eyed punters picked up that 30-point line, but I didn't, because of my ban on backing the D's. But my thought coming into the game was that, as I said, would be bullish. So my perception of it is really, really disappointed to have got the loss, but so much positive out of it. That second quarter was arguably the best we've played in a quarter of footy since the grand final and win in 21. I mean, close to it, we were dynamic, and so a lot to like. It wasn't a complete performance by any means, obviously. Really, the second quarter was such a standout quarter of footy. The rest of it was, I don't think we were great in the first particularly, and we're better in the last quarter than I think people are giving us credit, but heartbreaking loss in the end.
Heartbreaking indeed. Well, let's get into all the housekeeping before we start discussing the match. So each week I do put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcast. We love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who've taken the time to provide these 5-star reviews and actually writing the review, because if you don't actually write a review, you can leave 5 stars, but we don't know who it is and we can't give you a shout out on the show. So Praise B writes, a delightful podcast. Win or lose, this podcast is a must listen for Demon fans. Great banter between the three hosts, Andy, George and B-Man. Every week I learn something new about the team, players and game I love. The commentary is head and shoulders above the senseless waffle of the mainstream media nuffies. Thanks guys, and go D's. Well, thank you for that fantastic review, Praise B. We'll sing your praises this week, so keep the feedback coming and we will give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs. As I always say, we won't read out your full name on the show. And in addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud and all your preferred podcasting apps, and I think Google Podcasts no longer exists, but that has shifted to YouTube music or podcasts or whatever they call it now. Our podcasts are also available as audio on on through YouTube. But if you want to watch us on YouTube, our cartoon likenesses, that's also on YouTube. Search for Demonland Podcast and find our channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It is completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there's also a plethora of topics and threads discussing all things demon related. So join up to join in on the conversation. And if you don't want to join up, most of our users of the site are just reading what Demon Landers have to say. But if you want to join us tonight on the air to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, then please give us a call on 03 9016 3666, 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, bring you on when there is a break in the conversation. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message and we'll play it on the show. Yeah, just don't call during Big Man's stats files because generally they go on a bit longer and don't want to keep you holding. If you are listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday, except for the next 2 weeks. I'll talk about that in a sec. So if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. So as I just mentioned, the Demonland podcast will not be live or as comprehensive as it usually is for the next 2 weeks, as I'm going to be away on holidays. And given the different time zones and my hectic schedules, I simply just don't have the time to do the show in the format that we usually do. And more importantly, I don't have the time to do the show prep. And it usually takes me sort of half a day on and off of putting all the questions and things in order. So I have to work out the details with Big Man. We haven't discussed it yet properly, but Big Man may present his stats files in an audio format next week and perhaps maybe answer some questions that we get for the podcast in the podcast thread. And then I can attach an intro and an outro and upload it. It's a condensed version of the podcast. So you probably will get something in some type of format. And if it doesn't work out, well, then we'll see you in two or 3 weeks. That's after the Dockers game. So hopefully we are able to provide you something in the next couple of weeks. And you're only here listening to Big Man Stats Files. You're not here for George and I. And
I'm locked up for the next couple of weeks.
Yes, George. Maybe. Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Have you got Ian Drury duty?
Yes.
So
it's going to be hit with your rhythm stick.
You could. I said you could get a murder trial. You could be away for 6 weeks.
I could be. Yes.
And the way things are going, you probably won't miss finals. So yes.
George has been charged with underrating our under 22 players, and has got 6 weeks in the pen.
Okay, yep. That's done.
All right, let's get into
Andy, we're starting 7:30 tonight, so someone's going to be listening in about an hour, and we're going to be halfway through the show. But as George noted we're starting at 7:30, so I can really stretch out tonight. So
yeah, well, I asked the guys if we could do this an hour earlier because I'm leaving in a day or two, and I need to get sleep because the night before I travel, I'm not going to be able to sleep. So hopefully Big Man doesn't take this opportunity and go for an hour longer, but we'll see. Let's move on with it so that I can try and finish at an earlier time.
But you'll be in business class all the way over to the United States, won't you, Andy? You'll get plenty of sleep.
I can't sleep even in business class, maybe first class.
Drugs is what you need.
Yeah, that's what you want to do.
Just as a general thing, or just
All right, let's get into the match overview. In a thrilling encounter at the Gabba, the Melbourne Demons experienced a heart-wrenching 5-point loss to the Brisbane Lions, marking their second consecutive goalless last quarter after holding a substantial lead. Coach Simon Goodwin's side once again struggled to maintain their composure in the final term, allowing Brisbane to snatch victory in the dying moments. The match began with the Lions asserting early dominance, but the Demons responded with an explosive second quarter. Melbourne's midfield, led by Jack Viney, Clayton Oliver and Trent Rivers, overwhelmed Brisbane with their ferocity around the ball. Keziah Pickett was the star of the half, kicking 4 of his 5 goals and demonstrating his exceptional pace and finishing skills. Jacob Van Rooyen added 2 goals, helping Melbourne to an 8-goal quarter and a 23-point lead at half-time. And despite a commanding lead, Melbourne's momentum waned in the third. Brisbane began to claw back, narrowing the deficit with improved midfield pressure and more scoring opportunities. The Lions' persistence paid off in the final quarter as Melbourne's scoring dried up, managing only 2 goals, 8 after their dominant second quarter. Harry Petty, Ed Langdon and Tom Sparrow's missed opportunities in front of goal proved costly, as did Bailey Fritch's inaccurate finishing. The final quarter was marked by controversy and high tension with scores level and less than 2 minutes remaining. Alex Neil-Bullen was penalised for deliberate out of bounds, setting up Hugh McCluggage's match-winning goal. McCluggage's composed finish from the boundary gave Brisbane their first lead since the second term, and a desperate late attempt by Fritsch to level the scores went wide, sealing Melbourne's fate. Kasai Pickett dominated the forward line with 5 goals, providing a consistent threat throughout the match. Jack Viney led from the front with 26 disposals and 9 clearances, driving Melbourne's midfield efforts. Clayton Oliver bounced back from a poor game with 29 disposals and a goal, showcasing his elite ball-winning ability. The D's season now hangs in the balance as they sit 12th on the ladder with an 8-7 record. The upcoming match against West Coast at the MCG offers a crucial opportunity to regain momentum and restore some confidence. However, given their last outing against the Eagles, the task is easier said than done. Coach Simon Goodwin faces the challenge of addressing the team's late-game vulnerabilities and instilling the resilience and composure needed to secure victories in tight contests. Let's get straight into your stats files, B-Man.
No worries, just a comment. Do you reckon Cozzy got 9 coaches' votes? I saw in the thread you put on Demonland. Do you reckon that's the first time he's got 9 coaches' votes?
Yeah, I'd say that. 5 goals is probably his highest goals ever. He's probably kicked 4 on maybe 1 or 2 occasions, and maybe a couple of 3s and 2s and stuff. So yeah, probably the first time he's received that many coaches' votes.
He was just fantastic in that first half, wasn't he? So dynamic, such a great player to watch went on. So just ahead of the stats files this week, just want to return to Maxie's comments on ABC Radio that I highlighted last week. It was just interesting rereading them when I was putting together the stats for tonight. I had it in the doc that I was looking at. Just a reminder that he said that he was, a couple of times he said this, that he was really, really pumped for Friday night, that he set it up so well, Goody, that I think we're going to see a strong effort from our club up there. He talked about Clary working super hard and hopefully will get back to his best in the next few weeks. He talked about how critical winning clearances was at the Gabba, which was really interesting given how well we did out of the centre, particularly in that second quarter. Again, talking about being in the right form of in the right part of the year. He talked about excited to try and get there, not there yet, but hopefully with a couple of little tweaks. And we keep smacking in on the contest and our defence side of the brand and hopefully get there by the back half of the year. And I think that's exactly what we saw for big chunks of that game, where we really smashed in the contest. It was a fascinating game, I think, from a number of perspectives around tactically, but in particular how we played. Here's my tip, that the second quarter is the model that we're going to be looking at playing come the end of the year. It had very sort of similarities to our 2018 model when we were barnstorming it near the end of that year. And I was thinking back to, we really came hard in 2018. 2021, when we won the flag, you couldn't say that we came hard because we'd won so many games in the lead up, but we definitely played our best football in September that we'd played all year and played that barnstorming style. So I thought it was a really fascinating game. I think this was the closest that, to what will end up that model, which is really a hybrid between what I've been talking about, that sort of transition game that I don't think that we'll be playing, and that sort of style of Goody's been, for the last 3-4 years that we borrowed and then sort of changed and adapted from the Tigers, that sort of forward half footy. So I really thought we got the best look at, what that future is going to look like come finals in that second quarter. Really, really powerful quarter of footy. It was great to watch. It was such an exciting quarter of footy to watch. But there were some sort of stats that were curious, I thought, will certainly sort of speak to that sort of hybrid style. I thought, there was some... Where we lost the game, again, I think was our kicking, field kicking, actually. Our kicking efficiency was 55.3% to their 63, 7.7% difference. That, probably doesn't sound like that, but that's not great on a perfect night for footy. Missing so many kicks, 55, and that was a huge factor. Disposal efficiency overall was a bit better, 64 to 67 essentially, but it was really the kicking efficiency that was a big difference. Again, metres gained was basically almost level. We were down 6, inside 50s down 2, so that speaks to that sort of transition game. the really big one, and I'll touch on this a bit more detail later, was a really curious number. And I would hazard a guess that this is, at least in dry footy, this is the lowest number of intercept marks we've taken under Goody. I would not be shocked. I'm not sure if that's the case, but we only took 5 intercept marks for this game. They took 17. That was a huge factor, I thought, in the game. And we had 13 less intercepts than them, 59 to 72. Partly that's the model. We're intercepting less because we're not, playing that pressure game where we slow it down and force a dump kick and then do that. But, I thought it'll be interesting when we talk about the ins and out later. I guess that's part of the challenge of having 3 talls and running and not having an interceptor. Lever didn't have much influence, but that's a really low number for Goodwin coach team. Only 5 intercept marks. The other one, which was sort of speaks to, I think, some of our sort of defensive sort of structure that I'll talk to in a sec, was that they scored 3 goals zip from kick-ins, 3 for 18 points. Our season average, we only concede 2.7 points a game for points from a kick-in, and they scored 3. I can't remember. Were 2 of them in the first quarter? Do you recall we've won the end-to-end?
I can't recall. Yeah,
I think there was at least one of them. And so going into the sort of blueprint DNA, defence, as I've talked about, defence, contests, they're the 2 fundamentals of Goodwin's game plan, and those things were really back on board. Transition back half football, scores from defensive half and turnovers being the key indicators. It scores from turnover, and fitness, obviously, and we'll talk at length about fitness tonight. So on defence, I thought opposition score was I don't think, defensively, I don't think we were that great. And I reckon that would be the part of the game that Goody would be most concerned with. On expected score, it was 90.8 to 80. We scored 81, so we scored almost bang on our expected score, and they weren't far off theirs. They scored 86. So, and they had 6 rush behinds, which was another curious number. We gave up 51 points from the back half, which is not a great number. A season average is only 30.9 from the back half. Ditto for 3 goals, as I noted, from kick out. And I suspect a big chunk of that was in the first quarter. I actually think we were lucky to be in the game at quarter time, because we looked a bit defensively all over the place in terms of our ability to stop them on transition. They clearly came in with a strategy to spread us wide, which all teams have been doing in the last few weeks. They play that sort of kick mark anyway, but they were using the width of the Gabba a lot more than they normally do. Normally they're a lot more direct towards goal, the Lions. And they did sort of move it through us, but I felt like it wasn't because we weren't spreading. And I checked the numbers on the Telstra track at the end of the first quarter to test my sense with we're actually running okay, and we were smashing it on, particularly when on defensive running, sprinting on defence which I'll speak to a bit later, but is when you don't have the ball, when the opponents have got the footy. And so I thought our running and our patterns were not so much our pattern. Our running was fine in that first quarter. It was just that we were a bit out of shape. It really took to the second quarter, when we really got on top and we attacked ourselves. But I thought that first quarter wasn't defensively wasn't that great. I mentioned in terms of defence, last week we had 71 to 67 intercepts and 12 intercept marks down to 14. But this week they had 13 more intercepts, 59. We only managed to 72, 13 more. And intercept marks, as I mentioned, 5 to 17, which I'd be guessing that'd be almost close to the biggest differential under Goody. I don't know, but that wouldn't shock me if that was the case. That's a really unusual number for Goody. Partly that was that shape, and partly that's how we're playing. But again, defensively, I don't think they would have been thrilled, and a lot of that would have been in the first quarter. And as Goody noted, in the last quarter as well. I think that it's got a funny combination of their defensive system at the moment. They're setting really deep, creating space in front of them to help with that transition, but it really puts a lot of pressure on them to run back hard and cover when the ball's turned over. And I think that's a big reason why their scores from turnover half, from their back half, were a big factor. Last week, contested possession. So contest is a huge one of course, for Goody. Contested possession's the best measure of it. 135 to 143 it was last week. week down 8, and hardball gets we were +4. This week, a whopping 154 contested possessions to 130, +24. That is just magnificent in terms of the DNA of the Ds. That's amazing. 154 contested possessions against a team that, thrives on the contest as well, +24. Post clearance, we were +8 post clearance for hard ball gets. This was really terrific. We were +5 for loose ball gets. We were down on that last week. We were up on hard ball gets and down on loose ball gets. And I like this one too. Contested marks, post clearance, 14 to 13 +1. And I like this one as well. Contested knock on. We had 7 to their 3 post clearance, which was really impressive numbers from a contest perspective. Pressure last week, I talked about there for the match. It was 189 to 195. Our third quarter was our highest last week, 224 for a +27 differential. Our pressure was down this week, and sometimes they don't line up. And partly with the way Brisbane playing and that really looking to spread, there's less opportunity for contest. And I really think Brisbane tried to keep it out of the contest, particularly in that first quarter, or they didn't want to make it into a contest. And I suspect I know the reason why in terms of what we're able to do in the second. But our pressure was almost a season low in the first quarter, 148. That's terrible. I suspect, as I say, a fair bit of that was we were chasing tail and spreading, and there weren't so much contest, to 186. So a 38 differential, massive 37 differential in the fourth quarter last week. That's why I checked the numbers on the Telstra tracker, because I thought, hold on, what's going on here? And was pleased to see that, in fact, our running power was fantastic in that first quarter. The second quarter, it was 199 to 204, incredible high pressure quarter of footy. The third quarter, 180 to 189. And in the last quarter, as we did flag a bit, 161 to 181, so down 20 in that last quarter. For the match, it was 172 for 190, 200's considered elite and 180 is average. So interestingly, our pressure wasn't as good as last week. As I said, last week it was 189 to the Roos 195. So, we weren't as good this week in the pressure front. And that first quarter was a bit of a worry. I'm not so worried about the last quarter drop off. Top 5 pressure players last week were Nibbler, Chandler, Rivers, Jack Viney and Tom Sparrow, and really pretty much the same this week. Was number 1 was Jack Viney, above his season average of 60.5. He had 29 individual pressure acts. Nibbler was second, again around his season average. Clary had a great game, 21 pressure acts, 50 pressure points above his season average. Cozzy was next, 49 pressure points above his season average of 42. And the Colt, what a fantastic game from him in terms of the energy. Brought 23 pressure acts, 41 pressure points above his season average, albeit he played, that's his second game, 40.3. So, good pressure, the same, really interesting that basically it was the same top 5 again 2 weeks in a row, bar Trent Rivers. Tackles, another one where we excelled. We were +4 for tackles last week, +11 for tackles inside 50. We won the tackle count against a really strong tackling team on last Friday night. 71 tackles we laid to 53, +18 for tackles. It's a cliche, but we came to play 100%. Tackles inside 50, 14 to 7. So we one more tackle than inside 50 than we did last week, but for a differential of 7. That's just fantastic. That's awesome. This one was a curious number 2, and I think this goes to this hybrid model, this difference from the back half transition game. So all year, basically, we've been smashed in ground ball gets, as we were last week against the Roos. We were down 10 for ground ball gets. But in this game, we were up 11, 107. We only managed 85 ground ball gets last week. We had 107 ground ball gets this week to their 96, which is basically what the Roos got as well. They had 95 last week. 107 to 96 +11 differential in ground ball gets is really a great number. It goes to speaks to that contest. But I also think it speaks to sort of this different model that I think that we're going to be playing in the back half. We might need a new red and blue print if we get another couple of weeks of this. Our clearances this week were in raw totals. We had +7 for centre clearances. That's partly why I wanted to highlight the comments from Maxi about how important winning centre clearances are. And of course, they were a huge factor in that second quarter when we got on the bike. It had feelings like that bang, 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 really, didn't it? And 26-27 to stoppage clearance, so down 1. So +6 overall, but the big one was +7 just in raw totals. Contested marks was 14-13, not too bad against a side with so many good marking players as the Lions, I thought. And I thought Petty really started to look like getting back to his best. And Disco took a couple of good, strong marks. Probably Max, I have to have a look, but I don't think Maxi took that many and probably didn't have his best game.
2 marks for the game, 1 contested.
Did you? Right, okay.
2, yeah.
2, right. Wow, that makes sort of winning for contested marks by 1 even more important, I think, or like the role of Disco and others as well played. So, yeah, that was a pretty quiet game for Maxi, wasn't it, all things considered? Transition for back half. So there's some positive and negatives. Last week we scored 25 from our back half. This week 37, so much better. We were season average 31, so we're above our season average. The problem was that we gave up 51 points from our back half. Season average only giving up just a tick under 31 to give up 51. And you could argue that's where the game was. The first quarter and the last quarter, they were the two where they really seemed to spread us. Scores from score sources. Last week, again, the sort of issue that we're having was highlighted by one of the questions last week. Turnover, we were down 13 for turnover last week, but we were +12 for stoppage, +4 for centre bounce. This week, the curious one was giving up 3 goals straight from a kick-in, which Goody would have had him tearing his hair out. But from centre bounces, we were +14, 2, 3, 15, so 5 scoring shots from out of the centre square to only 1 point. So they only have 1 scoring shot, and they're a terrific midfield. So, they brought Ashcroft back in. They had Lockie Neal, got one of the best rucks outside of Maxi in the AFL. That's a pretty strong midfield. Dunkley was in brilliant form. So to win +14 from the centre bounces was terrific. +7 from stoppages, so +21. Again, this was a sort of problematic number. We were down 8 for turnover. So we want to improve our ability to defend on turnover. And I don't know, and I'm still, I guess, not convinced about Tomo back there. I think they're going to they'll come back to Howes, I think, if he can get back to form and in good look. Fitness. We'll cover that later. Centre bounces, just briefly, it looks like, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, George. It looks like they might have settled on their lineup for maybe it's a bit early for that, but they've got last week against the Roos, our top 5 centre bounce attendances were Gorney, obviously, Riv, Oliver, Viney, Sparrow and Pickett. And this week, Pickett went to 9 centre bounces. This week, pretty much the same. It was Maxi, Clayton, Viney, Rivers and Sparrow, and then Cozzy only went to 4. So it looks like, based on sort of at least 2 weeks data, that Trent Rivers may well be our midfield, a midfielder for the rest of the year. And I didn't think he was as good this week as he was last week, but
I can tell you why, because they didn't have him on the ground.
In terms of time on ground,
yeah. He spent 1/3 of the game off the ground.
Yeah, well, and again, we'll talk about that in terms of the fitness stuff. But it's, they're managing him, obviously.
Well, they don't need to manage him. He plays 80-90% when he's in the back line. All of a sudden, he's down to the same time on ground as Colton Tholstrup.
Yeah, but that will be to do with his individual program where he's at and all of that stuff.
We'll talk about the fitness, but I reckon they're stuffing it up.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I don't think now's the time to judge whether they're stuffing it up. It's down later in the track whether we're stuffing it up. So, so it's an open question.
We can discuss that while we're lounging around in September.
Yeah, right. Well, it seems like I have this Groundhog Day. I have had this same conversation at this time now. I think this is how many years have I been on the pod? I think certainly in 21. So we're up to 21 to where this is the fourth year having the same conversation. So we're a bit further behind the 8 ball than we have been in previous years.
We've never been sitting in 12th place on the ladder at any time during that period you've been on the podcast. So
no, that's true. That's true. But you were equally dismissive of the idea in 21, 22, 23 that we're coming off a loading phase and that we'll get fitter and or we'll get close to our optimal readiness. I don't think fitness is the right word actually, and that's where we're at. It's all it's all part of the bigger picture, Andy.
That was just me being pessimistic in those years. This is now me being realistic.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, we're still only 4 points off 5 points. What is it? 6 points from fourth. We're hardly in any worse position than last year you were talking about us not making top 4 at this time of the year. So you're still talking
I would give anything to go back to that time and worry about not missing out on the top 4 because now I'm talking about getting finishing as low as possible to get draft picks. But yes, go ahead, George.
At the end of the day, we kicked 3 goals in 3 quarters of football again.
And that's a pattern.
Yeah, that's not
and we can't kick straight.
Well, that's more the point. We kicked 2-8 in the second half and 4 points. So,
which has been the problem we've been talking about for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Inability to kick straight, but also inability to score sufficiently. So we're 13th, I think, on the scoring this year. We've got the 3rd best defence, but we're barely out. Yeah, we're the 5th worst kicking scores. You're not going to win enough games, not kicking enough goals at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a challenge for us for sure.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we're not scoring.
We will. I mean, look, the second quarter. When was the last time we kicked 8 goals in a quarter of footy?
No, it was fantastic. One of the best. We'll talk about the second quarter in a sec. That was fantastic. I just want to see more of that. Not necessarily, doesn't have to kick eight goals every quarter. But,
of course. We all want to see more scoring.
Just while you were talking, I did look up some of Cozzy's coaches' votes. He got in round 23 in 2022. You remember the game against Brisbane. He got 7 coaches' votes in that. I think he kicked 4 goals in that game too. In round 1 in 2023, he got 9 coaches' votes, equal with Lever on that day against the Bulldogs. That was the day he got suspended, I believe, for 4 matches or whatever he got. And in round 18 against Port Adelaide, he got the 10 coaches' votes in that game. Not sure I remember. Looks like it was a home game. That might have been. Oh, that was the one in Alice Springs when I think maybe he kicked 6 that day. Did he?
Can't remember that one.
But he did. He went berserk in that game, and he got the 10. So he has got 10 coaches' votes before. Well, he's got 9 and 10. So that's Cozzy. Well, are you done with the stats files?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so let's get into the listener questions. This is about Binman's bragging rights. Demon WA writes, feel like Binman has the moral bragging rights over George and Andy. The boys had a dip and, well, not us, the Melbourne boys had a dip and probably should have won that. Go Days. Sam6172 writes, I would like 30 seconds dedicated to Binman just saying, I told you so. So Binman, it's your time to gloat over your moral victory. You've got 30 seconds.
Well, if we'd won, maybe I would have been in a gloating mood, but we didn't win, and I wasn't. As I said, I thought we were lucky not to have been further behind in that first quarter. He's the big tall ruckman for them, Big O or whatever, missed an absolute clanger in that first quarter. My head would have exploded if he kicked it. It was after a ridiculous thing from May. I wasn't surprised, was I? So I did call it. So fair call to me. And it's really, you look at history, as I've talked about, I'm a punter, like on horses, and it's all about looking at history and going back. And I don't know why they don't do it more in footy, but in horse racing, if you're a serious punter, you put a lot of work into the historical right back. Some races go back 100 years. You look at the patterns. They're incredibly good at predictive powers, and that's we'll talk about it when we talk about the injury stuff. But it just does my head in the lack of looking at each week like a bubble, let alone looking at each season like a bubble without going back in time. And so I was thinking about 2018. This is in 2018, no one gave us a chance at this corresponding part of the season. And I started thinking Goody has been on this sort of roaring home train, right back to 2018, right back to 2017, arguably. We almost made the finals late after getting on our bikes near the end of the season. So, yeah, it didn't surprise me at all, the performance. As I said, I was a little bit disappointed in how we came out in the first quarter. I was thrilled how we played in the second quarter. It sort of met my expectations, which is why I'm sort of not more thrilled with the performance, because it was what I expected. So, we're right up to our ears this season. And I'll be shocked if we don't make finals. And if it's going to be hard work, obviously, to make top four, but, we're going to be that team that no one wants to play, just like the Giants were last year.
That was more than 30 seconds. Our next Demonland poster doesn't want to hear anything from Bin Man. Greg Demon writes, what is there to report? We blew it. End of podcast. I enjoy listening, but how is this, the bloke that's always positive, going to spin this? I assume he's talking about you, Bin Man. It's definitely not me. Love the podcast, but at present am seething with anger. We lost that one. Showed a complete lack of football integrity. Sam6172 replies, get a grip, man. We lost by a kick to a team that everyone expected us to be completely flogged by, including most of our supporters. We won't take much for B-Man to find some positivity, because large parts of our game were good. Ran out of gas in the last and lost a close one. Game is looking much better and several players showing improvement. Kept a team who has averaged about 130 points the last few games to sub 90. So B-Man, any more positive spin for angry Greg Demon on top of Sam6172's response?
Not really spin, but I mean, but let's not forget, both you guys and 90% of Demonland, like in all seriousness, gave us zero chance in that game and fully expected us to be beaten by 10 goals.
Yep.
Right. And so, I would just say is like I would just say that, everyone, if you can't recalibrate, like if that was your expectation going in, then it's a brilliant result. Then there's no other way of looking at it. It was a brilliant result. We should have won the game, arguably, although that's underselling Lions. I thought they took their chances and were good. So I mean, I don't know what there's not much to be negative about. I wouldn't have thought, other than not getting the 4 points. So in terms of how I'm going to spin it, The betting line was 29 points, right? And we made that no problems, right? So that's what the market had us at. And Demonland market had us getting beaten by 10 goals plus, and the podcast had us getting beaten by 15 goals. So
even on the night, I think we were lucky to only lose by 5, because they missed a couple of, and not just goals. I'm talking about the handball,
don't rewrite
the drop
history
mark.
now.
So
come on.
All right, let's move on. The second quarter. Before we talk about the last quarter fade outs, let's talk about our incredible second quarter. Paul B says, due to my daughter having a fashion show on Friday night, I could only watch the first half before heading to it, but was super pumped after our great second quarter, where we were connecting up and down the ground and converting. A phrase the commentators used was the best quarter since bang, 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 and I was wondering if that's true. Also, your thoughts on if the style we played in the second quarter will allow us to capitalise on the scoreboard when we have the ascendancy against other top 8 teams over the coming months. So, George, what was it about the second quarter that stood out for you? Where has that been all season? Can it be replicated for longer in our run home? And how can we do it for more than one quarter? I'm not asking for 4 quarters. I just want maybe 2 of those, 2.5.
We'd love to see more of that. Football supporters love seeing that style of play. I went back and had a good look at the second quarter again. There are a couple of things that stood out. The first and prime thing that stood out is Jack Viney.
Yep.
There was absolutely the whole outcome of that second quarter can be tied down to Jack Viney. Of the 8 goals that we kicked, he was involved directly in 6 of them. In handball change, kicks to players, getting the ball out in the first place. So that was the biggest single factor. We kicked 6 goals in 7 minutes. So yes, it was close to the bang 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 situation. I apart from giving Brisbane a couple of dead easy goals, like Stephen May and one other in particular. The Brisbane, what it exposed wasn't so much our attacking. It was that when you attack Brisbane's defence when it's so open, because it depends almost exclusively on Harris Andrew being able to hold them all together. When they get quick entry into their defensive structures, you just rip it apart. And that's exactly what happened in this game. The ball was coming in far too quick for them. Even the commentators were noting the space that Melbourne players had available to them. JVR kicked two goals, I think, because he was almost one-on-one. Cozzy got another one for the same reasons. Plenty of space in the back half. What we had done was Fritsch was shutting down Andrews, which was important to us. So it stopped those intercept marks that he notoriously takes. So all of a sudden you've taken out their main defensive structure. It wasn't surprising that we started to score goals. Chandler actually went more into the half-back line. He had his first touch in the second quarter and sort of came continuously off the half-back line, and also was involved in a series of forward scoring movements. So I thought that was interesting. The other thing I thought was interesting, and the commentators picked this up as well, was that Viney gave Berry an absolute bath. Berry was trying to tag him, failed miserably, and as soon as they moved McCluggage onto Viney, it stopped for us. It was quite remarkable in that 7-minute period. Like I said, Viney was involved in 6 goals. That's just absolutely incredible. So Jack Viney was simply the answer as to why we started playing so well. His contested work, his work in the chains, he just refused to stop at all. And of course, when he's doing that, it lifts everybody else. But putting McCluggage onto him at that point in the game basically stopped our scoring, which we saw in the second half of the game.
And again, so much comes back to accuracy. It's remarkable how little this is sort of considered, I reckon. I mean, it's so obvious, but we kicked, 1-5 in the first quarter?
Yep.
And 8-2 in the second quarter. We took our chances. Cozzy was fantastic. You take your chances, and, we don't kick we kick 4-1 in the first quarter instead of 1-5 or whatever. We win the game.
Yeah, but we got the opportunity for set shots, and we nailed the set shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Oliver nailed his, Cozzy nailed his, JVR nailed 2 of them. There's 4 of the 8 goals from set shots that, in previous weeks and other quarters we haven't been hitting.
Absolutely. And I said, I think that model, the way we played in the second, where we're really hard at the contest and we're really smashing in and creating that wave running, I think that's the model that in finals that we'll be playing and that Goody will want to see us playing. But it did look very similar to how we played in 21, which is that wave running, lots of players around the ball, getting it forward, really cracking in. It's so exciting to watch. No shock that we did flag a little bit, considering how hard we crack in. The other thing, George, in terms of, I agree with what you're saying about their defence, and these two clubs don't like each other, and I don't reckon Goody's, there's a real animosity there. And so we definitely had set ourselves to go up there and win it. Goody was furious in the presser, he could barely contain his anger at losing. Not anger with the players, but just sort of generally losing. I think, George, the other thing that we really look to exploit against the Lions is their lack of leg speed. And really sort of had them chasing tail. And so it was a fantastic quarter of footy. I could watch that over and over all day.
The other interesting thing I thought was, which ultimately is going to cost us in the end because it's not going to go on all the time, and it didn't in this game, was how much T-Mac was being used off the half-back line. He was providing a lot of drive for us up forward. He's not that sort of player. We had to replace Bowie and Salem in this particular game. You can't expect T-Mac to be the go-to man for delivering it out of the defence, but he was in that second quarter. But drops off, of course, in subsequent quarters.
Absolutely, and I mean we'll talk about it, but for a different reason. But leaving aside the sort of the the issue around fatigue. It was massive losing Salo, and it was almost sort of even worse losing Bowie, because they're both playing half-back flank, both playing small sort of half-back roles, both important for how we transition the footy. To lose Bowie late,
and you've moved Rivers into the middle.
And you move Rivers into the middle. I thought it was remarkable that, given, we're up against it, that to me that made the performance all the more meritorious, because Bowie out was a huge out. And I think they pulled the wrong rein, having Brown Dog as the emergency. I think they needed to have someone like a Laurie or as an emergency, because, maybe there was no thought. I don't know what happened to Bowie. Why did he get?
It was the back. It was injury, from what I
in
understand.
the warm up.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So maybe because it felt a bit like Brown was up there because for the experience and, to sort of cushion the thing of being subbed and being dropped. But I just don't know that he was the right sub. I would have, if Bowie had played, he would have played, and Wowie would have been the sub and a much better option.
We'll never know, because he really didn't get used. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's get into that last quarter in our fitness. We had a number of questions relating to the last quarter fade-outs and whether it relates to fitness. So I'll read them all out here, and you can get a sense of the temperature of the room over at Demonland in regards to this issue. At the break of Gorn writes, interested to hear Ben Mann's thoughts on our fitness level. Is it the mass of young players with less pre-seasons? We looked absolutely gassed in that last quarter. The group will get a lot of belief out of that performance, though. The contested ball game is back and here to stay. I'd put my house on us rolling West Coast next week. Scroll says, no goals once again in the last quarter. Why? This is becoming a pattern. Teams will start to have belief that they can beat us if they are close. El Diablo replies to that one, saying we are having way too many goalless quarters, even multiple in a single match. This has been one of the main reasons to find ourselves in this position today, likely to miss finals. Mandy Lorian says, have we forgotten how to win close games? And Lazy says, played our hearts out tonight and proud of the performance, but it was clear that we ran out of gas. Started the last quarter with Petty and Langdon missing set shots that would have given us some ascendancy. When we finally got it into the 50 after several minutes, we got pinged for holding the ball, and on another rare entry, Sparrow blazed away out on the full. These needed to be forward 50 stoppages to conserve some energy, but the game continued to be played at breakneck speed. It was only a matter of time before the damn wall broke. Rivers seemed a bit lax when taking that kick with 30 seconds to go, slow to get up, and of all times to turn your back on goal, that wasn't one of them. You need to get it in quick. With the ball having just been in the 50, I find it hard to believe we didn't have any tall timber up there ready for it. The kick was obviously going to the top of the square, yet Sparrow was the marking target. Where was Turner, JVR, or even Max? If we're going to delay a kick like that, so long then I'd expect to see the usual suspects lurking. Oh My D says, I think we showed more of that, more of what we are capable of in a game we lost on Friday than in any of the games that we've won this season. When we take the game on, when our contest and pressure rate is up, and when our defence holds, and boy, how much better does it look with Lever in there. As Goodwin said in his presser, he thought that we went into our shells and played it safe in the last quarter. I almost felt like we almost didn't take the game on at the end until a minute or so left, and T-Mac was ducking and weaving around multiple players to bring the ball forward with any sense of desperation to attack. Crushed after this loss, naturally, but honestly I feel better about how we're tracking from this loss than after the North win. Sam6172 says, obviously very disappointed with our fourth quarter fade-outs. Assuming it's fitness related and not Goody trying to put the game to bed defensively, is it too late in the season to correct this? I would have thought that most of our loading periods are done. The Demons of 21 were just hitting their stride in the third and fourth. It has been asked before, but have we possibly messed up our fitness program for this year, or is it more related to the huge amount of young players who just don't have the tank yet, as well as the interrupted pre-seasons for a few of them? Monocular says, thanks guys for your weekly contributions to my sanity, especially after a loss or a shaky win like versus North. The last 5 to 6 weeks have been quite hard to take, but despite the loss to Brisbane, the game was our best for a long time. Any thoughts on why we just cannot score in final quarters? Do we really run out of puff due to lack of fitness or burning out fuel earlier in games with nothing left at the end? Or is it just mental? Not quite defeatist, but maybe pessimism associated with the MFCSS. They seem to go into their shells. Well, big man, the last quarter fade-outs of the last 2 weeks, they do start to show a pattern. Is this a fitness issue? Is it explained by our inexperienced team with 11 players under 22 years of age? Do we stuff up the fitness program this season, given all the travel, the 2 5-day breaks and some of the extended breaks that we've had with the 2 buys and some 10-day plus breaks here and there? What do you make of our last quarters and our inability to kick goals and retain winning leads?
I'll get you to play that clip in a sec, Andy.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Just sort of a couple of people mentioned Mandalorian, one of them. It's sort of a slightly different question about whether, I guess whether we choke or how we go winning in tight games. I think that is a reasonable question. I think we've got enough evidence now where we've lost games that really it's not, not down to sort of an external factor like, fatigue or, something like that, where we've not choked, but we haven't won. Like, whatever you say about the Pies, whatever I've said about the Pies is the scores on the board for them, isn't it, in terms of their ability to win the close ones. And it's something we need to turn around, whether that's a psychological thing. As George mentioned before, our kicking's always been a problem. Poor technique gets exacerbated by pressure. It's just one of the truisms, I think. So I think that's a genuinely, it's a reasonable question. On the fitness front, though, it's, again, we talk about this every time of the year, but if you could play that clip from, this is Corns on that, it's quite a good show often on the AFL, the round so far on Saturday night.
Before you answer that, Bin Man, and you're probably going to have the same answer to me, and many people have flagged it, do you think it has something to do with having 11 players under 22 and a lot of those players having played less than 10 games or less than 20 games?
Firstly, Andrew, we don't have 11 players played this game under 22. It was only 7.
Well, no, that's not. No, that's not true.
We've got 11 on the list.
No, we had 11 players in this game under 22.
Melbourne just posted something on Twitter. Said the most 22 most 22 and under of any side in the last 2 matches. The next generation Demons is coming hot.
We had 7.
Bowie wasn't playing. Bowie wasn't playing in this game.
That's not the case.
I can tell you this now. JVR. This is who played this week. JVR, Rivers, Turner.
Rivers is 24.
Well, they've got that most players 22 and under, so Melbourne made a mistake there. I'll correct them in a sec. They've got Kynan Brown. They had on this picture Bowie, who didn't play, Tolstrup. Andy Moniz Wakefield. Is that Sparrow I see there? No, that's Woden, but he didn't play. Woden didn't play. And Windsor is there, and Judd McVie. So of the players that played, who's this kid? That's Howes, but he didn't play this week.
He didn't play.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7, you're right. 7 confirmed this week. And if Rivers is
under
8,
22, and then 11 under 50 games.
Yeah. So I'm just asking that question.
I'll give you another couple of statistics to worry you. Fremantle had 8. This week, Fremantle is sitting 3rd on the ladder.
Why would that worry you? I mean,
because it comes down to the quality, Bin Man. If you've got
come on, George. We had this discussion last week. The quality, we've got a great list under 22. I mean,
Fremantle is sitting 3rd on the ladder, having
that doesn't provide evidence that their younger players are better than us.
Yeah, but people are using the young players as an excuse. It's not an excuse.
Using it as an excuse. It's just a reality. We've got 11 players
for a start.
George,
we've got 11 players who played in this game, 50 games and under.
Trent Rivers
3 players
is 22.
who played in this game coming off 1 pre-season, not even a full pre-season because they were drafted in Windsor, Colt and Pup, not that he played much footy. Sorry, Andy?
Trent Rivers will turn 23 at the end of July, so he's not under 22.
So he's 22. He's not 24.
22 and under, so they were right with that.
Yeah. So he's 22 and under. So of any of those, of course that's a factor. Absolutely,
he's number 24. Maybe he mixed up his number.
Of course, it's a massive factor. So, just taking that comment, just that issue about our training program, is that it's a super complex. Planning a high performance program goes without saying. It's a super complex project that begins at the end of the previous season, and a lot of work goes into it. We lost Smith, Gus, before the season started. They would have expected to get more games out of Billings, more games out of Hunter, more games out of McAdam, hopefully more games out of Ben Brown. That's 6 senior players who are not giving us, who have had multiple pre-seasons, played up around the 100 games of AFL footy, have got a good base of AFL readiness under their belt. So for a start, that would have thrown their planning completely out of a loop. So whatever the number is, that's 11 players, George, under in this team that played 50 games and under, and Bauer didn't play, but he's only 52. That's of course that's going to have challenges in terms of your high performance program. One of the things that that they know about high performance is that it's accumulative. So you start from a new base every year, and every preseason of high performance you put in, you're starting from a new base this year. And so you got someone like Windsor, who's coming off 3/4, and Colt, who's coming off 3/4 of a preseason. That's their base coming into the season. So there's no doubt. Absolutely no doubt that's a factor in terms of our sort of where we're at fitness wise. But the thing I wanted to say about, and this sort of picks up sort of the questions as well, some of the questions about Corns' comments, it just drives me nuts. So it points to 3 interconnected issues. One, fitness is the wrong word in the context of load management and high performance. At least in the context Corns is talking about, discussing our fade outs in the last 6 weeks. So I'm not really sure what the best term is. It's not really fitness. They're all AFL players are fit. Our team is fit. It's more about fatigue or conversely freshness. So, I've talked about dynamic or being in optimal shape or close to their readiness. So the second thing is Corn notes he uses as evidence of us being fit is that we've been the worst last quarter team in scoring in the last 6 weeks. That's his evidence. Suggests that evidence is we're not fit enough, and has a go at us. His questions why we may not be fit enough, suggesting motivation's an issue, how we're rehabbing, we're partying too much was the implication from what he said. But here's where the Pearl and I can come together on stats, is it drives me nuts. It's like people stats are only useful to describe something, to be able to understand it. They're a symptom. They're not a explanation in of itself. So he makes the case that in the last 6 weeks we're not fit based on our scoring. But here's the rub. The whole data set, if he looked at it, was that we're the best last quarter team for the first 10 weeks. Number 1 in the AFL for scoring in the last quarter for the first 10 weeks of football. We almost ran over the Blues when we're 40 points down in the last quarter. We smashed the Hawks in the second half. We were the best team up to round 10 of scoring in the last quarter. So by Corn's own logic, that means we were a very fit team in that period, arguably the fittest in the AFL. So there's a complete logical inconsistency in what he's saying. So we were fit. 6 weeks ago, we were fit. The numbers, by his numbers, we scored more than anyone else in the AFL in the last quarter, meaning by his logic again, we were motivated. We did work super hard in the preseason. Suddenly 6 weeks later, we're not. Is it really, logical that our fitness could completely drop off a cliff in just 6 weeks? It just doesn't make any sense in of itself. And the third issue is Corn's diagnosis of why he thinks why we're not fit, which, as I said, basically boils down to him blaming the players, saying that, although he does touch on the youth of the team, but basically blaming the players for some sort of mental inadequacy or not being sort of switched on. It's just ridiculous, just asking questions. And it's a real bugbear of mine, the way the media, like Corns has played AFL. he's a high elite, as I understand it, a high level distance runner. He knows all about this stuff. He knows what's going on, but it's still seemingly taboo to discuss load management. I mean, it's clearly the most logical explanation for what's happening. At least he should be suggesting it as a possible factor, particularly given there's 4 years of evidence, as I talked about last year, of a clear pattern of almost in that 6 weeks that he's talking about, in exactly the 6 weeks, I talked about it last week on the show, of a drop-off in form and a drop-off in our inability to score in last quarters. That's what I meant about looking back to history. The history of the last 4 years gives us evidence that this is predictable, what's happening now. It will happen again next year, and it will happen the year after that as well. And so if you don't at least consider the load management as part of the equation, what are you left with? You're left with the players are soft and not working hard enough. It's so shallow and it's so unfair on the players. And it doesn't help fans understand what's going on. So the next day, it's just stupid. The next day, the AFL put out this article. So first to worst, fitness no factor. So what's causing D's finals fades? Basically, the whole article is saying fitness isn't an issue for Melbourne. The game led to some queries around Melbourne's fitness and the side's ability to run out games, but that's a theory that's quickly dispelled by the numbers. On Friday night, the Telstra tracker shows the Demons ran a total distance of 297 kilometres. It was the most covered by any side across the entire round, and 9 kilometres, which is massive in a game of footy, 9 kilometres more than the Lions during the game. The Telstra tracker also shows Melbourne ran 43 kilometres at high speed, 6 kilometres more than Brisbane. It completed 272 total sprints, 50 more than Brisbane, and it ran 21 repeat sprints, 4 more than Brisbane. The Demons' average speed in defence, and this is from the article, a number closely tracked by clubs as it displays the side's work rate without the ball, which is a point I've made numerous times, was 8.3 kilometres. It was significantly higher than the Lions at 7.4 kilometres and the 5th best of any side across the round. And it goes on to note that these numbers have been similar throughout that 6-week period. When we've been the worst fourth quarter side. In fact, despite going 2-4 during that period and suffering significant losses to Fremantle and Collingwood with 92 and 38 points respectively, Melbourne has covered more total distance than its opponents in 4 of its last 6 matches, including against Fremantle. Right, including against Freo. The Demons have covered more distance at high speed than their opponents in 4 of those 6 matches, have completed more total sprints in 4 of those matches, and had an higher average speed in defence than their opponents in half of those games. Right, so fitness, the whole article is basically providing evidence that fitness isn't an issue. So why fade outs, it asks? Again, it doesn't give anything about load management. It talks about youth. Of course, that's a factor. And it talks about Goody going to our shells. But, they're not reasons. I mean, that's not logical. So there was an excellent post by Chukrat. And this is really what, for me, this is what that article should have said. The article should have said, well, if it's, we're clearly not fitness, where's the fade out? Because we were definitely looking like we were slowing down in that last quarter. But so were Brisbane, by the way. The other factor is both teams, including Melbourne, were coming off 6-day break and travel. So 6 days, we know it's a huge factor in football in terms of being able to get up. So combine the youth, the 6-day break, coming off a bye. It's no surprise at all that we fell away. But this Chukrat on Demonland, there's a thread about this. It was basically triggered by Corns' comments. I thought we matched Brisbane from a work rate perspective across all 4 quarters, and fitness wasn't the difference. Both sides looked pretty gassed in what was a relentless fourth quarter, and while they held momentum, we had our chances and didn't convert. Similarly, they missed in what was a brutal final-liked game. Regarding the impact during the loading phase, it won't so much affect the ability to run out games as overall the players are stronger aerobically, but players lose some explosiveness due to the cumulative muscle fatigue caused by the increased training load. At the end of the loading phase, which we've just come to the end of during the bye period, at the end of the loading phase, the players would have around a week of tapering or reduced training load, which is short enough to keep the aerobic fitness gains they have made while freshening up and regaining their explosiveness. And that's exactly what we saw in the second quarter. This is the same approach taken by endurance athletes where they load up 2 to 3 months before an event and finish with a 7-day taper for the event. Looking at how we played versus Brisbane, our pressure was relentless. We would stick tackles, which in previous weeks we would look too slow or lack the explosiveness to bring the player to ground. And he goes on to say that we're absolutely in the hunt. So for me, that completely sums up. That's what that AFL article should have said. It's clearly around the high performance program.
All that says to me is that next year I should book my holidays 3 to 4 weeks earlier.
Well, you could have done that already.
I didn't listen to the last 4 years of data. Lefty asks, what did you think of Andy Manise Wakefield's debut game? I thought he did some really nice things, seemed composed and didn't panic, has a nice bit of pace. I think we might have found another diamond in the rough. George, what did you make of AMW's debut game in the red and blue?
Yeah, he played really well, slotted into where he was needed in that half back line. He was a more than suitable replacement for Bowie, I think. Bowie wasn't particularly good the previous week, but AMW certainly filled in nicely for him. Died off towards the end of the game alongside 17 other players. But not unexpected, given it was his first game, although he's played bucket loads of games down at Casey. But yeah, I think at the moment he's more useful than people like Laurie and probably even Woden. There's not a great deal of depth sitting down at Casey that's pushing through. He'll be a nice sort of added extra in that back line that we'll probably need at some point in the future again.
I loved his wheels, how quick he was. It makes such a big difference to have speed off the half-back flank, doesn't it?
Monoculus says the debutants this year are all looking good despite Pup's very little opportunities. That's kind of brown. Windsor has been a real find, and with another pre-season, he could be anything in the next year or two. Colt looks full of enthusiasm and grunt, and AMW so calm and poised. Howes will be good when he fills out a bit. Will we see any more like Jefferson or Seston maybe? This may depend upon where our season is heading the next month or so. George, we've had a lot of debutants this season, more so than in any of the past few seasons. 5 debutants, I believe, this year. Mm-hmm. How have you rated their seasons? Some have just been cameos, like Brown. Do you expect to see a few more, in particular, if the season continues to a trajectory that we might not be making finals?
I think the 2 standouts have been Windsor, of course, and the fact that he's still playing. We're up to 17 rounds now. Yep. We would have expected, half a dozen games from a kid that's slight at the start of the season, but he's been hanging in there. The truth is, we have to, because there is no one else. People like Billings and Hunter are complete and utter failures. So he's our best, and the fact that he's still being selected ahead of Billings and Hunter, who we played this week, tells you a lot about the standing. So Windsor's been fantastic. I really, really like Colt. I think he will be in the midfield relatively quickly. The fact that we're having to use Rivers in there because, once again, we don't have any others who are pushing. Laurie's been tried in there multiple times and hasn't provided anything, but I think Colt will. His enthusiasm is just infectious. He goes at everything every time. If there's a ball in front of him, he's like Viney. If there's a ball in front of him, he will go for it. So in terms of more to come through, Seston looks promising, but he has a good game, then he has a pretty ordinary game. Jefferson I wouldn't be bringing in simply because he's still learning his craft. He's learnt to lead in the second half of the season so far, so he's acting more like a forward. I said last week, he's got to learn to jump a lot more. You won't get away with standing with your feet on the ground at AFL level, and you don't want to bring him in, even for example this week, to play against people like Barras and McGovern. They will absolutely monster him. We don't want to burn him before he's ready. I think he will come through, so that's promising. But you've just got to give him time, like we did with JVR. Everyone was screaming for JVR, me included, in his first season, because he was capable in that first season of playing seniors, but they held him back. Give him the time. Comes in his second season and has been just fantastic. So it's really the problem is our fringe players that just don't provide any real improvement to the side. I hope we draft a lot more, because the really sad situation that we've got ourselves in is that every single player who we've traded since our premiership year, so Grundy and Shackey and Fullerton and Billings and Hunter, are all playing at Casey or in Sydney. We've just got no one out of trades. So let's hope the draft comes good.
Well, more kids. So, I mean, I'm much, much, much more bullish on our list of young players. And I reckon Colt, he was pick 13, Colt. We've got Windsor.
12 or 13, yeah.
So in first rounders, we've got Windsor, who looks a star. We've got Colt, who I totally agree, George. He looks, I just love both, his competitiveness. You've got JVR, who was first rounder. No, he was 19, wasn't he? First round. But he would, if he was a draft again, he'd be a top 10 pick. Yeah. McVee would be a top 10 pick. Howes maybe not. AMW, I reckon he looks like he might make it now. I agree on Jefferson. I'd keep him at Casey too, but I watched the last two games. He was moving a lot better in the last 2 weeks, like a forward, and he got rewarded for a second effort where he put a player under pressure and he kicked it on the full, which is what he wasn't doing at the first part of the year. He didn't mark it. He was out of the contest. Laurie's really the only one that I sort of worry about. I think Seston can make it if he gets a tank. Laurie's on the bubble. He could still sort of, he must worry where his football's at. Chandler is another one. Chandler's probably 23 though or something. But I think our young list is the envy of any of the other sort of top 8 teams. That's for sure. But I agree, George. I love the way Colt plays. I can see him going into the middle. He's a perfect replacement for Track. Obviously, he's never going to replace Track, but he's got that sort of combination of power and want for the ball. I haven't quite seen the best of his kicking yet because he's, by all accounts, a brilliant kick. But I think he's the sort of player that you hope Goody says, if you've got a chance at kicking the goal, just kick it. Don't give it off and take your chances when they come. So, I think the debutants, Pup looks so tiny. I'm not sure. I don't know about the selection, and then of course the use of him was another question altogether.
Talk about that in a second.
Howes is the one for me. Howes is the one that I'm hoping that was just exhausted and need to go back to the twos. I think he picked up 20 plus possessions, didn't he?
He had 22. Just quick, 22 disposals to 3/4 time. I don't know what he had in the last one.
Okay. So he's the player who's currently at Casey that we need back in the side, I think, to have that run. He can play tall, can play small. He's a player who can run off the back. As much as I agree with the sort of idea that Tomo's been, played manful and deserves his chances, I think our best defensive system is when Howes is in the side playing good footy. So it'll be interesting to see this week. I would not want them to bring Jefferson in. That's not, and they're not playing the kids. Like, as you say, George, the issue is, it's a big issue. It's a compounding issue. Like I mentioned, losing Gus, and I keep forgetting about Smith. Smith, of our best 22 players last year, we're also missing Melksham, now Petrarca, Smith, Brayshaw, and that's 4 of our best 22 not in the side, all senior players, all who we're having to or choosing to replace with kids. And it's got you can just see Windsor. He's hit a wall, Windsor.
And we haven't got Grundy, and we haven't got Jordan, and we haven't got Harms, who were all...
Yeah, but we can't, those were...
the thing is...
exactly.
They were good, useful. We're replacing...
Well, and see, footy too, that's the thing. Harms was a 150 gamer who had multiple AFL pre-seasons under his belt, and it seems like we've been sold a pup with Hunter now, and Billings is not in the side. So it really
Hunter
is putting a lot of pressure on
Hunter
those younger players.
Hunter was best 22 last year. He was in our team the whole year.
Yeah,
so
though he
effectively lost him as well.
That's right. They would have fully expected to be getting 15, 20 games out of Hunter this year. You would have hoped. And then if you did, you don't have to play a Woden, or you don't have to play a young player. And hopefully we'll pick up the Gus situation with his contract will allow us to be a bit more aggressive in the trade market. But, trading's always overrated in terms of who you can bring in. Unless you attract a free agent in the second to last year before their free agency finishes and give them some good coin, you never, Billings is about the best you're going to get. So
there's a couple of things with the trading. You can only trade who's available in the first place.
Exactly.
And the second thing is, even though people are getting excited about the salary cap space we have, so do every team, because the total player payments has gone up. So everybody's got a spare $1 million in the bucket in any case. And the second thing is, like I said, you've got to have someone available to give it to. And I suspect that when a couple of years ago we've handed out long-term contracts to Petrarca and Brayshaw and Oliver and all those guys, if those are backloaded, we're in more strife because we won't have the money available in any case.
I've got a feeling half of them aren't. We're front loaded.
Yeah, but I don't. You don't know because but that's a danger, that we actually won't have the money available, and you've got to be in the right spot at the right time to be able to get the players who are available. But there's not a Cameron, there's not a Lynch available every single year that we probably the sort of players that we need. And I suspect that's why we went for Billings and Hunter and
you go for what's in the market, don't you? And you hope it works. And but I mean, Hunter's really been the more disappointing one, because for the first half of last year, he was definitely best 22. I thought he fell away sort of later in the season, but he doesn't look like his body language was woeful on the weekend. I just suddenly thought, who's that number 12? He's wearing a 12 jumper.
He's just walking around the same as he was earlier on.
Exactly.
And I don't think in that game he actually played the final quarter.
Right, yeah, okay.
So I don't know what's going on there.
It could be the calf playing up.
Well, yeah.
We've got a voicemail from Salty, who's got a couple of comments and then talks about our Goodies use of the sub. So, George, what did you think of Goody's use of the sub this week, waiting for the last 3 minutes to put Kynan Brown on the ground, particularly given the ankle injury to Petty that he received earlier? The opportunity was there to perhaps make a change a lot sooner.
Yeah, look, I don't know what's going on in the sub. It's really difficult to say, particularly when you're looking on a television set instead of being at the game, about what's going on. Brown wouldn't have been a replacement for Petty in any case in terms of like for like. You'd be moving a few others around, but you do have to question, and I think this falls down to the fitness and staff as well. They're the ones who determine who comes on and off the ground. Why would you bother bringing Kynan Brown on for 3 minutes for the second week in a row? It just doesn't make sense. If you're looking for a tactical advantage, then you've got to bring him on for, let's call it 15 minutes or something like that. Give him a run when others can't provide the run. The other strange thing about the time on ground was people like was May and McDonald played 96% of the game. Why did they even come off at all? It's just confounding to me. Why would you take two players like that off for 4 minutes in the game? It's absolutely utterly pointless. I suspect, and I'll go back to the sound the siren in the premiership year when Burgess came up to Goody and said, "Do we leave Jackson on or do we take him off? He's due to come off now." And Max piped up and said, "Leave him on. He's playing well." I suspect we're just following the computer pattern which says take them off now instead of looking at the game that's going on in front of them. Brown should have been on the ground earlier, I suspect. Maybe, like I said, we weren't at the game. Maybe, sometimes you can't get players on because of where the players, and that's understandable. But this has happened 2 weeks in a row now, so the questions have to be asked because the same situation keeps arising.
I was curious not to bring him on because of the sort of run. I mean, clearly you'd say, well, Goody. I mean, in that decision with Jackson, it wasn't him coming off. It was who's going to take the ruck. And Maxie said for him to take the ruck. That was, but I reckon they've pulled the wrong rein having Pup as the sub, to be honest, because he doesn't. Wowie would have been the sub, and Bowie out was massive, so that would have thrown all of their planning around, both in terms of the game itself, but also the number of clicks that they have to run and all of that, because it forced them. They must have already made the decision to make Brown Dog the emergency, but I just don't think he's not flexible enough, Brown, in terms of the roles he can play. He can go up forward, but he hasn't got sort of experience on the halfback flank. They've sort of been playing him as a winger. He doesn't look like a natural winger, so I'm not sure that he's the best sub anyway. And Bowie on Wowie would have been able to come on. I would have taken Petty off but clearly Goody thought, well, this current setup's working. If we'd kicked a goal, if we kick one of those 4 very gettable goals, we win the game. And so no one's really talking about Brown in that context. But I think it's a legitimate question. I'm amazed Goody wasn't asked it in the presser. Is why did you leave your sub on when you looked like you were flagging and needed some run in the legs? And you could have taken Petty off. You could have then moved T-Mac forward, or you could have rolled things around, or I thought it was frustrating to have a sub and not use it when the main reason for the sub actually really is to bring a player on with fresh legs. That's its purpose, really.
Who would have been the sub? Because Brown replaced Bowie, so who would have been the sub? Had
Wowie for sure. Wowie is good. Like he's a good.
Wowie wasn't in the team, was he? No.
Didn't Wowie play? Or am I imagining it? Hold on.
I didn't notice him if he did. I got to have a look.
Yes, he did. Yep.
He did. Okay.
I was going crazy there for a sec. Yeah, he played. Didn't have a very good game, but he's a sub. For me, he's an excellent sort of sub in terms of his positional flexibility because he can play halfback flank. In fact, I thought Wowie was part of our challenge in that first quarter. We saw the challenge of Howes being out of that team, Salo being out of the team, Bowie out of that team with this new model because he was hopelessly outpointed at one stage. Wowie completely got caught out in that first quarter. Rayner, right. So Rayner, I didn't think he had a great game, but he would have been a much better sub option to bring on. And as I said, they would have been better off bringing. Brown played in the Casey game, so they got him back down to play. But I reckon Laurie would be better as a sort of emergency than Brown.
Buck Naked says, some time to think about the game after the initial frustration. We had 13 blokes under 100 games. We were without Track and Brayshaw and a few others as well. We had 11 players under 22, but I think that's been debunked now. Not excuses, just some framing. The red and blue print discussed on the pod suggests winning the clearance is not so important. However, I think it sets us up for success. The hunt and pressure attitude follows this clearance and allows us to go confidently and set up our defence. The whole slingshot off the halfback is okay, but when it comes at the expense of frontal pressure, I think the model is flawed. Only in the second quarter were we 190 in pressure, what I would see as a minimum standard for every quarter. Next, Brisbane took the Zorko kickoff halfback and opened us up like a tin of beans. We were busy running so hard to get off our opponents that we could not cut off the slick ball movements and our zones were all over the place. I think this is our biggest issue this year. Hold our zone or run and gun. A great plan would encourage the zone to reform on turnover up the ground so that from 80 metres from goal we become impenetrable. It's just not happening. We can be run down by applying pressure. No goals in the last quarter of the last 2 games, held by teams that look like they wanted it more. Misses by Petty, how they hurt, Langers and others, just not good enough. We are still in this, and again, there was a lot to like about how we showed up. When we win the centre clearance and apply pressure, we are a good team. Otherwise, we are often witches' hats. So, Bin Man, what do you make of the assessment in regards to the red and blue print?
Well, as I said, I think the red and blue print's a placeholder until we see. I think what we saw in the second quarter is what we'll see come finals. And it's interesting. I think that with that let's call it the red and blue print redux, is the that model, the finals model that Goody wants to play, that I think we saw a sort of snapshot of on Friday night, I think is going to be more focused on winning clearances. So clearance numbers aren't a huge stat, for instance, for Collingwood when they're up and about playing their sort of mid-season style, and it hasn't been for us this year, but it has been in the last couple of weeks. And so both the Roos game and the Lions game had some real clear similarities in terms of, as I mentioned, like a hybrid model between a fierce, intense, win the ball, knock it on at all costs, win the stoppages, as noted. Gorney had said last week how important it was to win centre clearances at the Gabba, and that's what we did. And as George noted, Viney was off the chain, and and so was Clary. That was Clary's best game this season. I think he was terrific, and Viney was really so much more aggressive than he has been. I thought Sparrow played well. We're really hard at it, so. I don't disagree with some of the comments. I think the challenge with the zones is you can't. The power of our zone was our ability to slow the ball on transition and get set up behind the ball. We are, like I mentioned earlier, we're pushing up. We're a combination of setting deep, and we're pushing up our back half, our back line, the line of our back half, much higher than we normally are. It's a very similar sort of way that Collingwood play, and we've been caught out the back a couple of times. Brisbane really got us out the back a few times in this game, and I think that's they're changing their defensive system. I go back to May's comments after the Richmond game when he was interviewed after the game and said how taxing the transition game is on defenders, because if you turn it over, everyone has to bolt back and get back. So I think they're sort of trying a little bit of a different defensive system. The zones will always be there. I think that, as we've talked about a million times, as Goody emphasised again in the presser, our DNA is defence, pressure and attack. And I think as we head towards the final, we'll have a much greater emphasis on winning stoppages as we have for the last couple of weeks.
There was one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about the second quarter that I did notice, that once again, because I was watching on television instead of being at the ground, I think in this game we stopped using the one down at stoppages. I think we've got the extra player to match them at the stoppage. One of the main reasons is we have no Petrarca in there.
I was about to say that's exactly right.
Without him, you cannot afford to let people like Lockie Neal run right, and he didn't in this game because there was always a man sitting on his shoulder. Not necessarily to tag him, but previously we would have given one of those mids freedom to move. They're not getting the freedom without Petrarca in there.
And I think, George, that's probably goes a long way to explaining our low turnover numbers, particularly our low turnover marks, only 5 for the game. And how we normally generate them is one less at the stoppage with that spare behind the ball. And if we're not carrying, if we're evening up at stoppages, we can't drop a player behind the ball. So therefore, we're going to be taking less intercept marks. And Lever was really sort of he was one-on-one. We played very much a one-on-one defense. And as I said, the other interesting thing is that sort of combination of setting deep to create space to help transition, but also pushing up quite aggressively. We really need Salo and Bowie back in that team, I think. And as I said, I'd probably like to see Howes come in for Tomo.
Radelaide says, thank you for this excellent podcast each week. I know it can't be easy given our form in the past few months. What did you make of the insufficient intent free kick awarded to Brisbane against Alex Neil-Bullen in the dying minutes of the match? Fair or highway robbery? Wells11 says, please just mention the horrible holding the ball against Rivers. I honestly think that call doesn't happen if it's a Dacos or a Cameron or a Bolton. I almost threw my censored glass at the screen. Rhino88 asks, can anyone on the panel explain how holding the ball works? I'm genuinely confused and wonder what we are doing wrong to always get pinged. Then the same thing happens to the opposition and we can't get a free. So, George, your thoughts on the umpiring in this match and in particular some of the frees that weren't paid, and, of course, your thoughts on that insufficient intent call on Nibbler that ultimately lost us the game.
Firstly, I'll start with the A and B insufficient intent. I think it was a correct call.
Yeah, look.
However, firstly, it didn't cost us the game. There are a couple of other things in the game about which I was equally furious and probably even more furious.
Oh, we had a shot to equal to tie the game.
Yeah, but apart from that, there was some, May's kick out in the second quarter, which went virtually directly to a Brisbane player. There was a goal there. Max, I think, in the third quarter, punched the ball in from behind the behinds area, punched it straight into the top of the goal square, and Brisbane score a goal. That should have went straight over into the third row behind the goals. Those are the things which cost you the game, not just coming down to one individual player. The umpiring is pretty bad across every single game. I don't know whether you guys watched the Essendon and Geelong game, but that was a game that was absolutely gifted to Geelong when the scores were almost level by 4 calls, which gave Geelong 4 goals. And the game was as good as over at that point, including the deliberate going through the goal when there was 2 players in the goal square alongside the Essendon player. Stewart ran out of the back line, took 3 or 4 steps, was tackled, lost the ball, play on, went down the other end, scored a goal. Draper had his arms taken out, front on contact in the goal square, play on. It's just across every single game there are similar sorts of calls that are affecting the overall outcomes of the games, unfortunately. I've got no idea what the holding the ball rule is, and I don't think any of the players have got any more. The umpires, when it was mooted by the AFL about changing the interpretation, that has disappeared.
It's a joke. It's a completely joke.
Yeah,
it's a total joke.
Yeah. Even in this game, Andrews thought he'd taken a mark, was tackled to the ground, and was called holding the ball. It's just no consistency about prior opportunity and what is or isn't, and there are 2 different rules around prior opportunity and whether you have opportunity or not, and the way it's interpreted. The trouble is it's interpreted instead of coming out with something more definitive.
Just make a rule that is clear and understandable and isn't, that is got less room for grey, as I've talked about ad infinitum. It's hard to not think they're doing it deliberately, like they are in control of the rules.
Yeah, and the classic has to be the deliberate the insufficient intent. Just use the same rule as in the AFLW. Everybody's quite happy if someone kicks the ball out on the full, that goes to the opposition. Why can't you use the same if you've kicked it or you've handballed it over the line inside the 2 arcs, then it's going to be a free kick to the other side. Take all the rubbish out. But I think the more and more I'm agreeing with Binman, I think the AFL are deliberately not coming out with something definitive because they like the fans screaming and attending matches and being upset and all that sort of thing.
Well, and all the media fodder and the contents and stupid dramatic music on 360 about,
That was exactly the next thing I was going to say. Gives people like BT and all the other clowns on the media something to talk about. Otherwise we'd have a game that we'd all understand. I think the fans, unfortunately, not unfortunately, the fans do understand the rules of the game better than the umpires and the AFL do.
I mean, it's just like, of course, it's a hard game to umpire. As we've talked about, they should make it professional. Just stop wasting money on things like goal reviews and, all of that stuff and put it into a proper program for the umpires. But they could solve so many problems just by properly writing the rules. On Nibbler's one, this is the thing and this is what most upsets fans, it does for me, is that I think that was the free kick. And I want umpires to pay free kicks that are there. And so if, he was a bit unlucky because he got tripped, so that could have got called, but it didn't get called. The other thing that was bizarre about it, and it drives me nuts, completely nuts, there was an umpire in front of him who was the officiator, who had the control of that decision, said no play, and the guy 30 metres away behind that contest called that free kick. But again, I think it was there. But what just does my head in is the inconsistency. So, that is not paid 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10 with 90 seconds to go in a game of footy. And so I'm glad, I'm not glad that they paid it in that circumstance, but I want umpires to make tough calls, doesn't matter what time. But most times they quote unquote put the whistle away, as if that's some sort of unwritten rule of football. It's ridiculous that, that gets paid one week, it doesn't get paid another week. Then you get a scenario like May, who clearly marks the football, doesn't get paid, they kick a goal, or in fact maybe that might have been the one where
they paid a block, but our player was I think was infringed upon anyway. He wasn't
there was
blocking.
another one where he clearly held the ball long enough to be given a
that
mark.
one. And then what about Omac, Oscar from their Omac?
Oscar McInerney
barely held it.
So
he didn't kick the goal.
There was the block against Hipwood, where Hipwood was ridiculous. It was just, but then when Omac takes a mark where he's juggling it, that sort of
but he didn't even hold it. There was no.
That's what drives fans nuts. And then in the last 30 seconds or whatever it was, when Rivers, I was screaming at the television. That should have been 50 metres. So in the first 10 minutes of the game, it's 50 metres. Rain, it goes over the line. And 2 months ago, they were red hot on 50 metres. Now they never get paid. And what about dissent? This time last year, everyone was talking about dissent, and that was last year's big controversy was dissent. And now it's not even fair income. Players are just yelling at umpires, and there's no 50.
And infringing the zone, that's disappeared.
That's completely disappeared. So I personally think Nibbler was stiff. What he should have done is handballed it into the shins. And if he'd got it through, Viney was on the other side. But he legitimately did get tripped. I think it was a fair enough decision. It just drives me nuts how inconsistent they are, particularly given Melbourne have been on the wrong end of exactly that scenario. Remember the Crows game?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
How can you not? You know what I mean? It's we lose where they clearly run it over, and then we get paid against it and lose a match. And I mean, a fair play to McCluggage. That was a beautiful kick.
Yeah.
Mm.
We still had our chances to win after that, though. We had a chance to draw or at least tie up the score with Fritter. And then that last play, I think I haven't looked at it actually, but I think we could have done that better with Riv kicking in. I would have loved to have if they'd given 50, though, because he definitely went over the mark. I think it was Rayner would have put him at the top of the goal square.
Probably would have only given us a 30-metre, 50-metre penalty.
Well, they only gave 30 to Clary for what it is.
Last week they gave a North Melbourne player 80 metres, and this week we're really getting shortchanged. Red Jacket writes, I would love to blame the loss on our inaccuracy, but the Lions missed some gettable shots and stuffed up some chances late in the game, dropping marks and missing targets. Monoculus says, any thoughts on the Choco kicking skills experiments, which did seem to work when he first arrived, but the last couple of years, both field kicking and set shots seem putrid. Has his message gone stale, or maybe he isn't doing it anymore? Petty in particular needs some formal training in set shots. Really cost us this week, though his ball attack has greatly improved. Maybe just confidence in his mind and his body. Fritter was talked up pre-season as a potential Coleman medalist, but seems to have lost all confidence and flair. Is he physically fit? Any other issues? So, B-Man, inaccuracy issues. We've talked a little bit about this tonight, so we don't need to go on too long. Is it all fitness and last quarter fatigue related? Poor technique? Backman being asked to be forward? Players simply out of form? Can it be fixed? Clock is ticking.
Well, actually, our accuracy was pretty good for, our expected score was almost bang on. I think that question that Mandalorian sort of noted about, the question is sort of executing under pressure when you need to win games. There's sort of evidence building up. That's what's letting us down. I mean, we were fantastically accurate in the second quarter. We missed 4 very gettable. Petty's one would have been massive to get that first goal of the last quarter. It was a shank, total shank. Fritter would normally swallow that. I thought that was Fritter's game. He was really a best game for a long time, really disciplined. As George noted, shutting out Andrews is critical to shutting down Lions, and I thought he did a great job. He was physical for the entire match. Would have been great if he took that chance. I reckon this idea that somehow Choco Williams' responsibility is, as I've talked about in other contexts, is I just think coaches are, massively overrated in terms of, AFL players' technique is pretty much done and dusted by the time they get to AFL footy. You can improve it around the edges. But bottom line is we've got too many players with poor technique. And, that, as I mentioned, I think one of the critical numbers was we're only 55% by foot. We've got a lot of butchers. That's and two of the players that we were talking about before, senior players, they would have been fully expecting to be in this side. We brought in for their foot skills, Billings and Hunter. Exactly to address a need that we haven't got. Fatigue definitely plays a factor. You can see with Windsor. Windsor's not been as sort of impressive as a kick in the last few weeks as he was for the first 6 weeks. I really start to sort of think about, about the mental side of it and executing when you need to execute. Like, as I said, McCluggage goal was ice, wasn't it? So whatever you say about Nibbler, he's gone back from the boundary line and completely slotted it.
Yeah. I'm not blaming Petty too much as well. 5 contested marks, and some of those were really telling. That's as important to us as anything else. I don't know who it was. Somebody on Demonland made a point that because his injury was on his left foot and he kicks with his right.
Yeah.
Whether that's affecting the way he kicks,
it's a fair point.
You would think that's possible.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does, but he's at least in this match, he's got some spring back.
Yeah.
And he's taking his marks, which are absolutely critical in terms of transition. When you've got a player playing up the ground and taking contested marks, those are really, really telling. Sadly, Max was completely off this game, where we depend on him to get the contested marks down the line. But, I think that might be a factor for Petty. People forget too easily. He basically didn't have any pre-season at all.
And then you've got Clary, who looked much better. And just on Maxi, George, the player rating, as I've talked about before, it's a pretty well-regarded stat in terms of giving a good measure of impact, better than votes and stuff, because it's a real measure. On the Wheelo's rating, he has a predictive rating. I'm not quite sure how it's arrived at the predictive rating for each game, but his predicted rating, Maxi, for this game was 15.2 for the 15.9 for the game, and he only had his player rating was 10.3 for this match. So Van Ruin was ahead of him, Tommy McDonald was ahead of him, Clayton was ahead of him, and just as a sort of indication of how incredible Cozzie's game was, his player rating was 26.3. His predicted rating for the game was 9.6. A phenomenal game of footy. So 26.3, 20 is considered elite. Anytime you get 20. Anytime an AFL player gets 20, that's that's an all-Australian level elite standard. 26.3. The next best was Brandon Starshevich, 17.4, and then Jack Viney at 17. That's an amazing performance by Cozzy.
Maybe we'll get a chance to. I've wanted to speak to Wheelo from Wheelo Ratings, and maybe in September, if we're not doing anything, we'll get him in to chat about how the stats all work. Oh My D says, I was furious all night at how dirty the Lions played. A few notable examples were Reynard's elbow into Woden, a cheap shot. But what upset me more was Harris Andrews punching Fritter after Andrews outmarked him. How does the AFL allow players to punch an opposition player to their body like that? It's a disgrace. I think, if anything, the dirty play lifted the boys, but I just don't think that's good for the game. But I actually wish that our players had a little bit of more mongrel in us at times. Teams do seem to bully us, and I never see much in return, and I don't know how productive or counterproductive that stuff is either way. I just wish we had a bit of mongrel or physical presence in our game. I like what Colt does. Colt's not scared to sort of throw his body around. George, what are your thoughts on the physicality of the Lions towards our players, in particular those two acts that OMID's mentioned?
A couple of things there. I agree with you, Andy. I don't think we've got the players who are physical enough. We've got players who are contested beasts, but I don't know that when it comes to physical man-on-man type stuff, that apart from Jack Viney and potentially Colt, Stephen May will stand up for himself, certainly, but there's not too many others do. So, but I agree with you. I don't know the value of that in a game of football. Does it affect the score at the end? Maybe the mental side of things if you're trying to get on top of an opponent, perhaps. But what I don't particularly like is the AFL, and particularly the match review and the tribunal, letting players get away with straight-out punches. It sends a really bad message to younger players. it'll come back to bite the AFL in a big way in years to come. But until they start penalising people for doing that, there is no point at the end of the day.
Doesn't make any sense, does it? Just suspend them. It's the last time anyone, give them a week. You punch anyone, you're weak. I don't care whether it's anyone with a closed fist. I just don't understand it. And I mean, maybe I'm misremembering, but they used to, like, you're done. It was like done. In the 70s growing up watching the footy, if someone closed fist someone, you've got a week every time.
Yep, and they should just do exactly the same. And guess what? It'll stop.
Of course, who would give someone go miss a game of footy for hitting someone in the stomach?
I mean, even in the NRL, you do that. You get yourself at least sin bend. So.
And again, like they know, they talk. It's so much frustration with the AFL is they know it goes down to the lower levels. They know it goes down to juniors and the ammos, and what players get away with it for AFL level gets copied in the under 12s.
What did you think? So Stephen May last week got fined for staging. Did you see the vision of Braden Maynard in the game against the Gold Coast when he had a love tap, which I think the player who love tapped him got fined or whatever. But Maynard went down like a sack of potatoes. A bit of a staging incident. You'll vomit if you see it. And there was no case to answer for a bit of a
inconsistency again.
Roos, this is where I'm at. Yes, Roos 2 says, sitting behind the goals, it was interesting to see whenever we kicked a point, the Lions fullbacks were rushing to get the spare ball and kicking it in before our players were set. They seemed to be able to slice and dice us with their razor-sharp kicking out of defence. They were so well disciplined. So, B-Man, your thoughts on the Lions kick-out strategy against us, and perhaps any thoughts on our own kick-out strategies and whether you see any issue there? Because I thought we were a little bit slow at times to get it out, and maybe that was Stephen May being a bit gun-shy after he stuffed that one up early in the game.
There's no point rushing it if you're not set up. So, but clearly the Lions were set up. They clearly looked in that first quarter. That's what I meant. They opened it up. They came in with a strategy to spread us. They use kick mark as it is. That's their game style. But they looked to use more of the ground in this game. That was clearly a strategy, and that's what I meant. Is in if I was probably going to knock us, is that there's a lot of talk about that last quarter, but really the first quarter was the sort of, for me, much more of a concern, and it seemed to take us a while to get our shape in order. And I think it's, we've talked for ages on the podcast about how important is and how strong our defensive system is. And you can take one player out and put another player in. Well, that's much more challenging when we're moving away to a different system now. We're playing a different sort of faster game of transition footy. We're still trying to set up our zones, but, it doesn't look the same way. It's not the same game. The balls, we're very good at slowing the opposition ball movement, but that's not happening at the moment because of the game style. So to take Bowie out of late, I know I'm harping on Bowie coming out, but just structurally, you're replacing him with Wowie, who has not convinced me yet that he's a natural defender and has looked at different times when he's played back all at sea, I've thought, in terms of his positioning. And to me, that was shown up in the first quarter, and it was shown up in their ability to go end to end, which is sort of picking up what the question is. 3 goals end to end probably would have been the thing he was most furious about. We won't give up that again for the rest of the season, I wouldn't think. We certainly haven't so far. As I said, we're only averaging 2.5 from a kick out this season. To give up 3 goals in one game. They kick well too. Like, I have to say, it goes so much is about how well teams kick, and their field kicking was better than our field kicking.
And just to put a voice to some text on a screen, we also have a voicemail from Roos 2 praising the return of Jake Lever. So here's Roos 2.
Watching Colton throwing himself in, sort of creating a bit of chaos footy. It second thing is I just don't think we should ever underestimate the value of Jake Lever to our team. My God, he just doesn't have to do much, but he just straightens us up, and just look at the results when he's out. Anyhow, guys, thanks for the pod. Just absolutely love it. Cheers.
Thanks, Ruse, too. Thanks for the call. George, it was good to get Jake Lever back into the lineup.
Oh, it certainly was. The thing I like about Lever, apart from the way he plays, is that he is the real general in the back line. He's the one who's directing the players where to go. And when you've got a whole series of younger players sitting around you, that's exactly what you need. Even when that May disaster occurred in the second quarter, Lever had them all together, telling them, "You've got to spread. You've got to go where you need to be." Instead of May having to kick it to someone who's got obviously another player too close to him, you shouldn't have taken the kick in the first place. But there may have been no other options. But yeah, it was impressive to see the way Lever is just constantly directing traffic. I think one of the players said after the game, Lever is hoarse because he's just all game long just telling players what to do, screaming at players to get in the right position, because the defence, and we are still the third best defending side in the competition, depends on having the right structures in place, and he leads them.
Yeah, it was hard to know. It's funny because he wasn't playing that intercept role, and we weren't intercepting. But you're right, and he was I think he's got to the stage. I remember in his first season when he was pretty vocal back then. I remember Sam Frost and him at a set too. But he's got the runs on the board to be able to do that now. And what a great call though from Roos too, Andy, is that so true. It's the hope that kills. In that halfway through that third quarter, as much as I came in bullish and confident about our chances, I was just thinking, can we just get to the end of the game, get the 4 points, and but as even in that last, it's a great game footy, but that last 3 minutes it was just so painful, and I think that it goes back to that sort of psychological stuff that was mentioned 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you wonder when the players start thinking. When you do have a run of games where you're not finishing them off, it must get into players' heads in terms of thinking, oh, no, here we go. So hopefully, we'll start winning those close ones. But, yeah, absolutely, it's a good call, the hope that kills.
What says Goodwin has made it clear he intends to persevere with the Petty Turner JVR 3-tool setup up forward. Should we stick with the 4-tool defensive setup of May, Lever, T-Mac, Tomlinson? Big man, what are your thoughts on the 4 tools in defence, and will Goody stick with it in the run home?
No, I think Tomo will come out. I think, again, unfortunately for Tomo, I think it's horses for courses. They had, tall players. Yeah, I thought he did all right, but he was a factor in our sort of low turnover marks, although he did take a nice one. I think Howes will come back in. We need that sort of pace. Goody really does like those talls up forward, and he's made it clear that he sees that this current setup is how we're going to go forward. I think the more interesting question is where Melksham fits into it. Frida want to get on his bike and sort of perform at a higher level, because if Goody's committed to Turner obviously JVR and Petty as well, it doesn't leave much sort of space to bring Melksham in, and you can't see McAdam getting back in at the moment. And who would Melksham come in for? I can't see them dropping Frida. He's too classy to have running around at Casey. But I thought Turner fell out of the game. He was good in the first half, but he wasn't very influential in the second. And I thought that was Petty getting closer. He's getting closer each week, Pets, to the sort of player he can be when he's fully up and about.
The thing with Turner is I think he's getting better every week. There are a couple of good. dissected. He's got a couple of good contested marks in this game.
Up the ground.
Yeah, he did. He took.
Yeah, and that's what we want. You want someone who plays like Petty and JVR do, moving up the ground, doing more than just leading out of the goal square. So, and Goody's made it obvious in his presser that's what it's going to be for the rest of the season. And once again, Jeffo is the only possibility of anyone else. It's not going to be Ben Brown. So,
but also Jefferson doesn't, as we've talked about a lot, is that it's actually, your point's a really good one, George. It's not about just marking in the forward line, is it? It's marking up on the half forward flank or half back flank, and Turner took a critical mark at one stage, which was a really nice clunk, and then you can control the game. That's what Brisbane like to do that as well. You take that strong mark and you can stop, and everyone can get set up, including the defense. The defense can get set behind the ball and get in their systems. That's a real key to the way Goody likes to set the ground up.
If you get a turnover there on half back flank,
exactly.
Backline's not set up.
Exactly, and I can't see Jefferson being fit enough to do that sort of up and down the ground running. No. He's going to, not yet anyway.
No, there's no evidence of that to date.
No, and they're not even playing him that way yet, Casey.
Finally, of the questions, Go Lordy says, hello, gents. Thanks again for the excellent podcast. Bin Man's eagle-eyed review of the stats often tells a more positive story than we spectators get from watching the game on TV, helping me in particular to bring my heart rate down to a more sustainable level. Bin Man's stats actually raise my heart rate. I just want to take this opportunity to apologise to the Melbourne Football Club and its coach, Premiership Goodwin, for my remarks last week when I predicted we wouldn't win another game this year. We didn't win in Brisbane, but it was clear we could have. It was a different team we saw against the Lions, a Melbourne team that restored my faith in the team's ability to win. Imagine having a dead-eyed kick, you used a different word, in Jake Melksham out there taking that fourth quarter shot for goal that Harry missed. He's so close. We're so close. George, could we actually lift the cup this year? Jeez, go Lord. I don't know what you've been drinking, mate. D Old Fart says, poor percentage may sound a death knell on our finals prospects in 24. Even if we win the requisite number of games, are we good enough to recover a significant part of the percentage we've lost over the last 5 to 6 rounds? And we've got a quick voicemail, which was the end of Salty's message earlier, and I'll play it here. So, George, to answer Go Lordy's question, could we actually lift the cup this year? To answer D Old Fart's question, can we claw back that percentage lost? And to answer Salty's question, can we make the finals? And why?
We won't be lifting a Premiership Cup this year. I think if anybody's seen Sydney and Carlton playing in the last couple of weeks, there is an absolute gulf between where we are playing. We've of the last 7 weeks, we've won 2 games against 2 teams in St Kilda and North Melbourne, who are both in the bottom 4. We've lost a 3rd game to the West Coast Eagles, who are 3 out of the 4 bottom sides. So we also, the second part of the question was around percentage. Basically, we've got to win this week by about 10 goals to be able to, and it's in our court. Hawthorn beat West Coast by 10 goals this week. That's what we have to be able to do to get a decent percentage. We are now points and percentage sitting outside the 8. We're depending on other teams losing. A lot depends on this week. We have to have a very, very convincing win to be able to get back into the 8. We would prefer it if Port beat the Bulldogs, that'll eliminate them. At least keep the percent, because their percentage isn't all that great. If I was one of those 2 sides, I can't quite remember. So we need the favourable results going our way.
I haven't even had the guts to have a look at a ladder predictor at the moment.
Oh no, don't do that. It's all before us this week. This is our last opportunity, you would think, to get a decent winning score and improve the percentage so that we're within striking range of the 8, and that's about the best we can hope for.
Not going to ask you, B-Man, because I know exactly what your answer is, and it might raise my blood pressure.
I'll just say one thing is that it's just not the case that this is our last chance to beat up on a team. We'll beat up on teams.
Okay,
You watch.
all right. Yeah, it's already gone up. Okay. Let's talk about the Casey game, and we're not going to harp too much on this, but I've got a bit of a summary. In a wet and challenging contest in Preston, the Casey Demons overcame both the Elements and the Northern Bull Ants to secure a 28-point victory on Saturday, marking Casey's fourth win of the season. That's in round 14. The match began under a somber sky with drizzle and cold temperatures, creating an inhospitable environment for players and spectators alike. Despite the conditions, those who braved the weather were treated to a tight and gritty contest. The Bull Ants first to score, but Casey responded, and the first quarter saw the teams trading goals, with the Bull Ants edging ahead to lead by 4 points at the break. The second quarter continued the goal-for-goal battle, with conditions deteriorating further, making play increasingly scrappy. Casey's superior skill began to shine through, particularly with Bailey Laurie and Kynan Brown excelling in the midfield. By halftime, the scores were level at 38 apiece, and the third quarter turned into a slog, with heavy rain making it difficult for either team to play clean footy. Casey managed the only goal of the term, thanks to Shane McAdam, who put them ahead by 6 points. Despite dominating possession, Casey could only add a few behinds, taking an 11-point lead into the final break. And in the last quarter, Casey found their rhythm, with Ollie Seston kicking 2 quick goals to extend the lead. Matt Jefferson, who had been consistent presence up forward, added another, and McAdam sealed the win with his third goal late in the game. Bailey Laurie was a standout performer, collecting 23 disposals and laying 10 tackles. Blake Howes also influential with 22 touches. Tom Fullerton was dominant in the ruck with 29 hitouts and 20 disposals. Kynan Brown, despite having played the night before, contributed significantly with 20 disposals and 6 tackles. And Jack Billings' experience was invaluable when he kicked a crucial goal in the second quarter. Casey's efficiency was in marking. They recorded 79 marks to the Bull Ants 34, and that was a key factor in the victory. This control, coupled with the ability to handle the wet conditions better, proved decisive. Casey Demons will now travel to Brisbane to face a strong opponent at the Brighton Homes Arena next Saturday. And they're going to aim to build on the performance and continue their momentum. And why the game against Brisbane next week wasn't played this week in Brisbane while our other team was there, who the hell knows? That's fixturing. Do you guys have anything to add quickly?
It was pretty wet conditions, which led to the sort of game that you expect. I wish Mitch White was on our list instead of a couple of the people who are. He just knows how to get the ball, and when he gets the ball, he uses it so brilliantly compared to some of the others we got in the side. Howes was particularly impressive. I would say that he would be coming back in this week when we talk about the West Coast game. McAdam with 3 goals, but one of them was a Joe the Goose out the back. He gave away a couple of absolutely stupid free kicks when we should have been kicking for goal, and gave away 50-metre penalties downfield. And he took a magnificent screamer of a mark at one point, but then just doesn't contribute for long periods of time. So I can't see much future there for him. Fullerton played in the ruck the whole game, so I wouldn't overemphasise his statistics in terms of ruck hitouts. It was simply because Verrill is off with concussion this week, so there were no other rucks. Fullerton was the solitary ruck, I think, that we had for the whole game. Hunter was busy walking around the ground, not doing very much, and I'm pretty sure he didn't play at all in the last quarter for whatever reason. Shaki was ordinary as usual. Billings would do a couple of good things, and then at one point he gave three consecutive turnovers. It's just not what you need out of these sort of players. The sad part is, so not much else to add to that. There's just not much at Casey which enthuses.
Anything you want to add?
Sorry, Andy. The D's around that sort of finishing games, and maybe they need sort of a good sports psychologist to come down the club. And I'm going to nominate George. Just the way he pumps up those players, that you get him into the club and get them fired up.
Okay, let's move on to the injury list. At the time of recording, we've not received an official injury report from the weekend's game. We don't know the extent of Petty's rolled ankle from Friday night's game, and given the history with foot injuries, that could force a change this week, but we'll see. According to a training report this morning on Demon Lamb from poster Ditcher, he said that both Salem and Bowie did some training, but were mainly in the rehab group. Jack Viney was in the rehab group as well, and if you recall last week, I think he was also in the rehab group early in the week,
with
so that's not a surprise.
If he,
with a
yes, with the
Birkenstock.
Stay in the rehab group if he's going to play a game of footy like that.
So Petty also in the rehab group, but did run several laps of the oval and was moving well. There is still 6 days to the game, which may be needed for some of this group. Also, Lever was in the rehab group, so watch this space. I don't know if that's just being cautious given his injuries, his knee surgery that he had a couple of weeks ago. Ditcher also said the pleasing thing from training is that Melksham was doing full training and was moving very well.
And might play this week, huh?
Well, maybe he'll play in the twos this week, yeah. He might go up to Brisbane.
Yeah.
Don't know if we'd rush him back.
They won't be rushing him back, surely.
It was interesting if you looked at the Jake Lever interview after the match, and for the ladies who are interested in young footballers and their bodies, there was a lot on display in that particular interview in the background of players with their tops off as they came out of the shower or whatever it might have been. But
sounds like you had a good look, George.
No, it wasn't me. I was thinking of other ladies who attend the training on a regular basis and annoy the players. But each to their own. It wasn't my interest. My interest was
George. He protesteth too much, doesn't he, Andy?
He no,
it's all right. It's okay, George.
This is equal opportunity. I'm sure there were guys who were interested in that too. So let's not.
Yeah. But what I did take out of it was Viney had a big patch of ice on his knee.
Well, that's probably why, yeah.
And Woden had a lot of strapping on his calf. So take that as you may out of that.
Well, it was a brutal game of footy. Both teams, Brisbane come off 6 days as well. And we'd had a brutal game of footy the previous week too. It's two tough games of footy. So leaving the whole conversation about load management and all of that aside, we have got a young team. Whether it's 6, whether it's 7, under 22, it is 11 under 50 games. That's almost half the starting 22 under 50 games. 50 games is considered widely as a sort of benchmark figure that before you're sort of considered a senior, you can deal with the rigours of footy. Back-to-back tough games, it does make it hard for these young blokes to get up. What was Salo's injury? Did you...
Well, Salo the week before, didn't he come off as a sub? And then it was his knee. So during the week, and we talked about it. There was a tweet early in the week, I think, before our podcast last week, where they said that he was training, but Melbourne were confident that he'd get up. He was putting his knee through the paces, and Melbourne were confident he'd get up and play. He didn't get up and play.
So you'd expect him to play this week. And what was Bowie's injury? I didn't even hear.
Didn't George say back?
I thought it was
related
back.
in the warm-up or something.
Right.
Was it warm-up or was he never going to play?
I don't know.
Okay. So, boys, based on the match against the Lions, what you saw or read or heard about the Casey game and what you've gleaned from the injury and training reports, who's coming in and who's going out this week?
Well, I agree with George I really hope, obviously, that we flex this week. The percentage is absolutely.
Well, we'll talk about the preview in a second. This is about who's coming in and who's going out.
Yeah, no, I know. So I hope they field the strongest team possible is where I was going with that. And the strongest team possible includes Bowie and Salo back into the team. So if fit, I hope they don't play any funny business with, they need to take this game we need to be ramping up. We need to be flexing. So Salo back in, Bowie back in, assuming both are fit. I'm hoping they are. I'd keep AMW as the sub. I reckon he's almost the perfect sub because assuming he gets brought on. Because if he does get brought on with he's got run in his legs, he's clever, he can play. They've been using him off the halfback flank at Casey, but he can play forward if need be. That's where he's played most of his career so far, including his junior footy, as I understand it. I think I'm right in saying, George, that he has spent a little bit of time in the middle at different times, AMW, but certainly, I mean, they're probably not going to run him through the middle, but he could play high half forward, he could play half back at a pinch, he could go to the wing. So I think Tomo probably comes out. I'd like to see Howes back in too. So Wowie probably comes out of that mix then. So Wowie out, Tomo out. I'm missing someone to come out, but I'm sure there'll be an injury.
Pup.
Yeah, Pup. Well, he'll come out.
Yeah.
Although he played pretty well in that Casey game from what I saw, but we'll good effort anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, the Demons return to the MCG in round 17 to take on the Eagles as they look to bounce back from a devastating and heartbreaking last-minute loss to the Lions at the Gabba. Many D's fans are still triggered by our last outing against the Eagles in Perth, in which we were beaten up upon by a younger and hungrier outfit as the D's went down by 35 points in one of the upsets of the season. On that day, Jake Waterman kicked 5 and Jack Darling kicked 3, and young gun Harley Reid made some premiership midfielders look like rookies as he racked up 21 disposals and booted 2 goals himself. On that fateful day, we lost Jake Lever in the early minutes of the match, and since then the D's have only won 2 and lost 3, whilst the Eagles have not won a game. Last week against the Hawks, the Eagles kicked their equal lowest score ever in WA. Something tells me, though, that they will come with more fight this week when they face the D's at the MCG for the first time in 10 years. Yes, you've heard that right. The last time we played the Eagles at the MCG was in 2014. And since then, we've played the Eagles and have been the away team in Perth 11 times. Our only 2 home games against the Eagles in 10 years have been in the Northern Territory. How's that for fair fixturing? George, followed by Bim-Man. Can we knock over the Eagles this time around, and how will we do it?
We should knock them over. We should have knocked them over the last time, but so we can't put any faith in that. I watched the game against Hawthorn. Hawthorn absolutely, utterly cut them apart. Fast movement. The Eagles, I'll give you a statistic for you, Bin-Man. They got their first mark inside 50 in the last quarter.
What?
Wow. They had 3 for the match. They got their first
They'll
mark.
take 3 in
50.
the first 5 minutes against us.
Yeah, yes, and that's with Waterman, Darling, and Oscar Allen.
Yeah.
Oscar Allen was back as well. 1 mark inside 50 and 3. Waiting for the third quarter to happen. Hawthorn just completely denied them any access to getting the ball up there in the first place, and that's where you stop them. As the commentators in the game kept saying, and it was absolutely right, if it wasn't for Barrass and McGovern, Hawthorn would have won by easily 100 points.
He's a gun, Barrass, isn't he? They both
are.
They guns, but I just love Barrass. He's just fantastic.
So it's going to Hawthorn murdered them in and around the ball, in and around the packs, in the midfield. West Coast have got a couple of problems. Flynn, their ruckman, I think they're solitary ruckman at the moment. He was off injured with an ankle injury, I think. Waterman was off with something to do with his knee. I think they were claiming it was a cut on the back of the knee. It certainly didn't look like that in the actual event. He came back on the ground, but it didn't matter because the ball... he came back on the ground in the last quarter, but the ball never went into the forward 50 in any case, so it didn't matter how he was moving. Harley Reid is an absolute gun, but the Eagles are a mere shadow of what they used to be. You've just got to get on top of them early. You've got to stop the ball getting into those 3 big talls in the first place, because they are fantastic if they get the opportunity, as we found out in the last game. So it's going to depend a lot on our ability in the middle and around the ground to deny them the opportunities. Max should have an absolute ball. Even against Flynn, he should do very well. But if Flynn doesn't play, they're in real strife.
Yeah, I'd love to know what Maxi was. That was an unusually sort of poor game from him last week. So I think, I'm hopeful that we will come out, and I do expect us to win pretty handy, 40, 50, 60 points. So I think that we'll play similar to how we did in the second. We'll run and gun, we'll spread. I did watch a bit of that, their game, not a huge amount of it. One of the things I meant to say in the stats file that was really interesting is that, again, sort of Goody is a lot more experimental than he's given credit for. And something we've been trying to implement that we'd slowed down on, but it's frustrating fans, but it came together in that second quarter, is our forward handballs, is that we're really looking to be super aggressive with our handballs. All teams use those quick handballs to get it released from the stoppage and get it out of that sort of inner ring. But Melbourne are really, really working on those really quick overlap handballs with wave running, that if you think back to that practice game against Richmond at the beginning of the season, that's exactly what we were doing. So I think we'll look to do that on the weekend, and it can be frustrating for fans because when it breaks down, it's like, why didn't you just get it forward? I think we'll really look to spread, move the ball quick. I think we'll start to look play in waves a bit that we've did in that second quarter. I think we'll look to get on top and really try and put them to the sword. They'll be furious about not winning the game on Friday night. So I think we'll attack from the get-go. We won't be sort of holding on to the ball much. We'll be looking to link up with handballs. And that handball thing was really curious, is to three coaches all have been intertwined in different ways. Hardwick at the Suns, Uze at Tigers, and Dees all played on the weekend extremely similar games of football, like super similar, and to a lesser extent Hawthorn, with lots of fast running in waves and using handballs to go forward and chain up going forward with handballs, which is super exciting when it works. We got one of our goals end to end was exactly that sort of style of play, that it was really exciting end to end footy. I think that's what we'll see on the weekend, but I just found it really curious, particularly the Suns. They played almost identical game plan to how Melbourne tried to play for much of the game against the Lions in their win over the Pies. They were impressive, the Suns.
What do you think about not having played the Eagles at the MCG in a decade?
Could not believe when I read that same stat through 2014, and the reason I couldn't believe it is as soon as I read that number, and we got beaten by 90-odd points, didn't we, that I thought, oh, my God, I went to that game, and I remember I was running late, and I missed the first 10 minutes, and we were already 3 goals down or something. I was like, Christ, and then we got hammered. It was Bruce's first game or second game or...
Yeah, possibly, but it was early in the year. But even if the two times we've only had 2 home games against them in that period. How does that happen? And I know we sold, we played them in the Northern Territory both those times. But how can you play? How does that happen?
AFL.
Come on,
NFI.
Like, we laugh about our Geelong thing, but that's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It is.
I think it's something similar is happening at Geelong this week. I think it's Essendon they're playing.
They played Essendon this week.
Sorry?
They played Essendon this week.
Who's playing at Geelong this week? I can't remember. I think it's the first time in 10 years that team's played at Geelong.
Well, that's all. Oh, yeah, Hawthorn's playing, because they've been playing at the MCG. Yeah. Because they've been two big teams for a long time. So,
but the same thing, 10 years before to play at Geelong.
Yeah, but
how often do we play at Geelong?
It's a bit different because Geelong do have a thing where they play games at the MCG and at GMHBA Stadium, and that's. But we play at the MCG. That's our home game. And even if we played those 2 Northern Territory games at the MCG, that's still only 2 home games against a team in a decade.
In a decade, it's just ridiculous. So speaking of
the stat.
A rallying call is that every Demon fan who can should get to the footy on Sunday. Honestly, George is right. Percentage is important. I expect we'll win by a good margin. I won't be shocked if we win by 50, 60 points and put them to the sword. We need to get rolling as a footy club. I'm still bullish about this season, but if 15, 16, 20,000 people turn up on a Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock at the MCG, first time with a red footy for a long time, that's so get along, support Melbourne, go nuts to when we kick goals, because it's the players tell us it's a factor when the supporters get behind them. Fair play to bloody Eagles fans; they're still turning up to the footy, so Melbourne fans should be too.
Unfortunately, I won't be there.
Andy, Jesus.
But I went to our game in Sydney.
America.
I was almost a lone person talking, screaming in the stands in round one, or opening round, I should say.
It didn't happen that round.
Andy wants to see America before it falls apart totally.
Yeah, well, that's right. We'll be going to the Gold Coast later in the year as well. So, yeah. Trying to follow the sun.
Everyone else but Andy get to the footy on Sunday. What's the weather?
We'll be there in spirit. Well, the weather in Los Angeles will be a nice 30 degrees, but the game will be at 8 p.m. at night for me. The weather is
partly cloudy, patches of morning frost, slight chance of a shower, light winds, minimum 2, maximum 16, chance of any rain 20%, ground not spongy. It looks pretty good for the D's.
Very good. All right. We're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, albeit in some shortened format. I'll speak to B-Man about that.
No one will be able to interrupt me.
He's just going to go on. You're going to run out of space on your hard drive, I think. But we will be back in the full format after the Dockers game. That's for sure. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Praise B. Thank you to our voicemailers, Salty and Ruse 2. It was nice to hear from you, Ruse 2. Your questions or comments do form an integral part of this show, so thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions or comments. Thank you to Demon WA, Sam6172, Greg Demon, Paul RB, At the Break of Gorn, Scroll, El Diablo 14, Mandalorian, Lazy, Oh My D's, Monocular, Lefty, Buck Naked, Radelaide, Wells 11, Rhino 88, Red Jacket, Ruse 2, What Say What, Go Lordy, and D Old Fart. And D Old Fart, I hope you're enjoying your drive. D Old Fart tells us that he listens to us on his long drive that he has to take. So thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman. And thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We'll read it out on the next show. Go Demons!
Go Redleggers!
Come on, Demons! Come on, Demons! Come on, Demons! Come on!